بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I'm running, got stuck in traffic, so running a bit late, but we can go ahead and start class. So, before we get into the topic of today, which is going to be mushtarak and mu'awwal and mufassar, and then we move on to haqiqa and majaz, the question I have for you is the topics that we studied so far. We did khas and we did am, and we did mutlaq and we did muqayyad, right? Why did we study them? What's the point? Was there some benefit to it, or is it just theoretical? Like, what's the value of studying am and khas and mutlaq and muqayyad?
Assalamualaikum, Sheikh. I mean, for us, ultimately, to understand the general scope of how and when to derive rulings and not to take things purely at face value.
Okay. So when we studied anything else, is there anything to add or?
To understand how the different rulings came to be from their sources.
Okay. Good. And that is exactly the subject of usul al-fiqh, right? The subject of fiqh has to do with knowing the rulings and knowing their sources. Usul al-fiqh gets into not just knowing the sources, but also the means by which we got to the ruling. And so there were several examples we did where maybe previously we had studied that, in the Hanafi madhab, there isn't a requirement for a wali. Or in the Hanafi madhab, reading the Fatiha in prayer is only wajib, only. I put that in quotes because it's still obligatory. It's wajib and it's not fard. Or maybe we studied that, there's a difference of opinion between the Shafi'is and the Hanafis on, or the Hanbalis and the Hanafis on of the head to wipe, or do we need to read Bismillah or not before the wudu, and do we need to make intention or not? And so hopefully through studying some of these concepts, we can learn, and we can learn when we see that the Shafi'is say that the consistently in the Quran, every time Allah says raqaba, it actually means raqaba mu'mina. But the Hanafis, when they say raqaba, they say when Allah says raqaba, it could be raqaba mu'mina, or it doesn't have to be raqaba mu'mina, depending on what Allah has said, right? So we can appreciate these differences of opinion. We can understand where the non-Hanafis are coming from. We can understand where the Hanafis are coming from. And we can see that there's an order and a logic and a system behind all of this, regardless of whether we agree or not. So I'm not here to train you to become Hanafi. I'm not here to train you to become non-Hanafi. And I'm not here to tell you which opinion is exactly the right opinion that you must follow, but hopefully to help you understand why these differences of opinion exist and what the different rules are. Okay, so it's not just like, let's learn some definitions. Oh, this is what am means, this is what khas means. This is what mutlaq means, this is what muqayyad means. It's important to understand the concepts, and it's important to understand that there's consequences to this, right? The consequences being, what does it mean when you have the verse of wudu, which is mutlaq, and then we have a hadith, which are trying to come and do qaid of it, and then the Hanafis have a very particular approach in how they handle that, okay? So every time we study a concept, I don't want you to just learn it. I also want you to think about, why are we studying this? And sometimes I'll forget to explain why we're studying something. So I want you to ask, like, hey, wait a second. I know this chapter is like all nice and technical and complicated, but why are we studying this in the first place? Okay. So today we're going to move on to mushtarak and mu'awwal. Before we get into the chapter, does anyone remember what mushtarak and mu'awwal and mufassar are? No?
Mushtarak is it like a word that can be interpreted in many in as like more than one meaning?
Okay, very good. In English, it's called a homonym.
Common, yeah.
And what it is a word that is spelled and pronounced in the same way, or multiple words. Maybe I'm going to put my own definition on it. It's different words that have different meanings, but they're spelled and pronounced the same way. So what you don't know is when I use a word, which word am I using? It has either two meanings or multiple meanings. So an example could be the word spring in English. What does the word spring mean?
The season, spring.
Or it could be like a spring of water.
It could be a spring of water. Anything else?
Mm,
Anyone studied physics?
no.
No one's in physics?
No.
You know, your mattress in your bed, it could be a
Oh,
coil mattress, or there's like
yeah.
a spring in it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you studied physics, you would learn that the force when it comes to spring is equal F is equal to negative kx. Okay. So anyway, you don't need to know that for Solid Fit. But so spring can be like, it's like a coil metal thing that when you press it, it bounces back, right? It goes like boing, 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 boing. So that's a spring. The season is a spring. Body of water is a spring. I'm sure there's other meanings. Do any of those three that we just talked about have anything to do with each other? Like, is there any relationship between
Completely
the
different.
completely different, right? There's no relationship at all between any of those three things. And the only commonality they have is that they are pronounced and spelled in the same way, but they're just three different meanings. So if I told you, I want you to go outside your wherever you're at, your house, your wherever you're at, and go look at a spring, and then when you've done that, come back to class. Which one am I referring to?
Could you repeat that again?
I say, I want you to walk outside,
Mm-hmm.
find a spring, look at it, and come back to class. Which spring am I talking about?
It could spring of water,
Okay.
or it could be the spring like they use in mattresses.
Okay. But it's not. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So it could be a body of water, or it could be the physics one, the mattress one, but it's not going to be this season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So through some clues, you were able to figure out that it's one of two. Now, let's say we were in physics class, okay? And the entire class, we've been talking about forces and springs and all this stuff. And then I say, I want you to go outside, look at a spring and come back. Which one do you think I'm talking about?
The mattress one.
Yes. Okay. So are you like you were able to figure it out through the clues, right? Like you were able to, like, I didn't have to tell you, by the way, what I mean is this type of spring and not this type of spring. Like you were able to figure that out from the context. Now, let's say I'm in art class and I say I want you to come back. I want you to go find a spring and draw it. Which spring am I talking about?
Sorry, you said which class?
Art class. I'm sorry if you answered it, I didn't hear you.
No, I couldn't hear properly which class you said.
Oh, sorry, art class.
Art class.
So you're
Okay.
asked, you're sitting in art class. Yes, and your
Yeah.
teacher says, go out, find a spring and draw it.
Spring of water.
Spring of water. Okay. Are you 100% sure? The spring of water. It's possible I
No.
wanted you to draw the coil spring, right? It's entirely possible. So you think you're pretty sure that it's the body of water, but you're not 100% sure because it could have been some other spring, but you're pretty sure about it. Okay, so is that is called mu'awwal because you've interpreted something. You've come up with an answer and opinion you believe to be correct, but you can't be 100% sure it's correct because there's a possibility you're wrong. Maybe we're sitting in art class and I asked you to draw the coil spring. Okay. Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Do I need to be host? I don't need to be host, right? Okay, so if I'm in art class, I tell you draw a spring and you draw, you go out, you find water and you draw it. You thought that's what I wanted, but maybe what I wanted was I wanted you to find the coil spring and draw that. Okay. But anyway, you thought it was that, so that was called mu'awwal. Now, if instead I said, I want you to draw a spring, I want you to go find a spring, I want you to draw it. And then what happens is I tell you, and by the way, just to be clear, I want you to draw the coil spring, a coil spring that you find, okay? Not some body of water. Now I've given you the clarity. So I took something that was mushtarak, but the speaker himself clarified what it is. And so we call that mufassar. This term mufassar is going to come up again later as well when we study it, inshallah. So anyway, we have the original word, which was a homonym, which is mushtarak. It has it has either two meanings or multiple meanings. That's why it's called mushtarak, because it shares, right? In multiple meanings, it's shared in terms of the same word has multiple meanings. It's mushtarak. If we can figure out a meaning, great. If we can't figure out a meaning, by the way, the word's just going to stay mushtarak. If the word stays mushtarak, we cannot act upon it because we don't know what it means. If you are able to make a pretty good guess and figure out what you think the meaning is, that's going to be called mu'awwal. Mu'awwal. And if I, as a speaker, tell you what the meaning is, then that's called mufassar. Okay? So mushtarak either stays mushtarak, or it becomes mu'awwal, or it becomes mufassar. And another point of usul, of Hanafi usul, is that what you can't say is all of the meanings apply. Okay, so because that's not how we speak in language. If I say, I want you to go out and find a spring and draw it, do I mean find any kind of spring, whether it's water or the coil thing? No, I had something specific in my mind, right? It doesn't. So if I say go draw, what I meant was go draw a body of water, you came back drawing some coil thing, you would be incorrect, right? So I have a specific meaning in my mind, and you need to figure out what that specific meaning is. You can't say, I mean all of the springs, all of the different types of springs that exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Sheikh, can I ask a question related to this? So how do you respond to people who basically, they get caught up in this notion of like a lot of the ambiguity in the language, right, of the Quran and the Hadith? I know there's the ayah that we're taught, right, in
Which
in
ayah?
introductory to Quran, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب. وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. So like the Quran
Yep.
itself clearly states that there's going to be ambiguity,
Yep.
but just from the notion of like if you're intended to follow a law, why could it not, for example, have been more clearly laid out or spelled out?
Okay. There's got a couple of layers to unpack over there. So first of all, we're using this word mushtarak not necessarily because there's ambiguity in the Quran. It's actually to help us establish our usul, that when we find a word, we want to make sure we know. It's a concept in any language. If I use a word and it's pronounced a certain way and spelled a certain way, you just want to know, am I talking about this thing or that thing? Okay, so it's just a principle of interpretation, not necessarily a point of ambiguity. It becomes a point of ambiguity when people start arguing, oh, maybe a different meaning applies. Okay, so that's what happens. But really, Allah intended one meaning, and we're trying to figure out what that one meaning is. The concept of muhkam and mutashabih, the way that it's explained in the Quran, or the way that it's mentioned in the Quran, is not that there's some things that are clear and some things that are unclear. It's not that general in terms of like, oh, it's some things are clear, some things are not clear. Why would Allah at all give us something that's unclear in the Quran? Allah calls the Quran a bayan. He says it's in simple, clear Arabic language, right? It's mubin, it's Arabi. Why does Allah remind us it's Arabi? Because he's saying, I gave it to you in your language. It's not that like, oh, like it's in some foreign language. Arabic is a language that, you know, humans have. It's a living language. It was a living language. It is a living language. And the Quran is mubin. It is clear because Allah wants to guide us. So the Quran is going to be as clear as it gets. Any concept of like, yeah, you know, Allah wants us to like unlock the mysteries of the Quran, that would not be clear. That would not be guidance. It's hudal linnas, hudal lil muttaqin. Inna hadha al-Quran yahdi lillati hiya aqwam. Yahdi, right? So it's guidance in every way, and guidance has to be clear, and that's what Allah intends. The issue that happens is people misinterpret this verse. When Allah says, wa ukharu mutashabihat, something that's mutashabih is where you understand the so what is Allah referring to here? Allah is referring to the Quran is the Quran has a number of external references in it. Okay, the Quran is going to refer to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran is going to refer to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. The Quran is going to refer to things that happened. Okay, the Quran is going to refer to all kinds of objects that sit outside of the Quran. This is what language does. If I say banana, right, you think of the idea of banana, but then I ask you what's a banana, and then somebody needs to come and show a banana and say, this, look, this is a banana, it's got skin on it, you can unpeel it, you can eat it like this, it tastes sweet. Unless you've tasted a banana, how do you explain to someone what a banana tastes like? Unless you've eaten mango, how do you, and if the other person hasn't eaten mango, you're still not going to be explaining to them what's mango. Okay? And so what the Quran is doing is it's referring to things like all language does. We refer to things that have a theoretical concept, and then they have a practical manifestation. So when I say banana, there's a theory of banana, but then I can show you banana, I can make you smell banana, I can make you taste banana. Okay? And if I explain a banana to you, and you haven't seen it, you haven't tasted it, you haven't smelled it, have you really understood the banana? That's what mutashabih means. Okay? That's what mutashabih means, that Allah is telling us there's Jannah and there's Jahannam. And Allah tells us in Jahannam, there's a fire. And this fire is really hot. Okay? And Allah's telling us there's all kinds of other like crazy stuff in Jahannam that is very difficult to understand. And in Jannah, we have these rivers flowing, and we have these fruits, and then we have like grapes. Okay, do we know what grapes taste like on this earth? Yes. Do we have any clue what the grapes of Jannah are like? No, because maybe some of us, not me, but maybe some of us on this earth, we're like, you know, grapes are okay. Not a big deal. Pomegranate's okay. I don't know. You know, it's fine. I think pomegranate's fantastic. But like, you know, it just depends on who you are. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But in Jannah, you're going to have grapes and pomegranates and milk and honey, but it'll be so different because when you taste it, you're just going to be like, oh my God, this is so good. Like it's, you know, sometimes you taste something and you have a certain type of chocolate or something and you feel the texture in your mouth and you feel the whole, like the food tastes so good. You're just like, that's so good. You know, that feeling, imagine everything you're having in Jannah has that feeling. Now, when you think of just grapes, you may not have that feeling, but that's the grapes of Jannah. So what Allah is telling us is when he gives this description of things that happen after death, things that happen in Isra and Mi'raj, things that are, you know, things that are going to happen in Jannah and Jahannam or the day of judgment or all of those things, Allah can explain them to us in words and concepts, but do we truly know the taste? Do we truly know the smell? Do we truly know the experience? That is mutashabih. Okay? So most of the Quran, we can understand, hey, if you do this, this will happen on this earth, it's like this. But this idea of, for example, in Jannah, the biggest ni'mah is not even the food and the enjoyment and all of that. The biggest ni'mah you have is وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, right? So Allah says in the Quran again and again, imagine a world where you have no fear, no insecurities, no peer pressure, and no worry. I may go and again, like being a foodie, like I may go and have a very tasty lunch and I might overeat. And what I do is like, oh man, now I have to go to the bathroom. Like I overate, or now I overate and, you know, I had too many calories for today. And so now I'm going to be, you know, I have to work extra hard to do some cardio, right? None of that happens in Jannah. And so the concept of every time we do something that we enjoy, in this dunya, there's usually some suffering or some consequences that come with that. Imagine a world where there's no suffering and no consequences. Eat, 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 eat. And you don't even feel, you know, even that you start feeling full, you're like, but it tastes so good, I want to have some more. You don't have to feel full. You can just taste and have some more. So these concepts for us, we can understand in theory, right? But can we understand them in practice? No. And that's what Allah means when he says, ayatu muhkamat. Those are things that we can understand and we know the external reference and we've experienced the external reference. But ukharu mutashabihat are those things that we can understand sort of theoretically, but we haven't experienced it and we won't be able to experience it until we get there. And that's why it's mutashabih. So I know that's like a little bit off topic, but that was your question and that's my answer. Okay, let's go ahead and start the chapter. So if you want to go ahead and, I forget who read last time. So whoever hasn't read recently, please read.
بسم الله. تعريف المشترك: المشترك ما وضع لمعنيين مختلفين أو لمعان مختلفة الحقائق.
Okay, so mushtarak is the word that was put in place for either two different meanings or multiple different meanings, referring to completely different realities. It's not like the words are necessarily related to each other. These are just completely different words that happen to be spelled the same way and happen to sound the same, because how many words are you going to invent, right? And so languages sometimes have words which have many meanings. Continue with the examples, please.
مثاله قولنا جارية فإنها تتناول الأمة والسفينة، والمشتري يتناول قابل عقد البيع وكوكب السماء، وقولنا بائن فإنه يحتمل البين والبيان.
Okay, so مثال قولنا جارية فإنها تتناول الأمة والسفينة. The word جارية means what?
Slave girl.
Or?
A ship, I guess.
Exactly. The word jari, like, oh, you could be talking about a ship, you could be talking about a slave girl. Those are two completely independent things. والمشتري يتناول قابل عقد البيع وكوكب السماء. Okay, so what does the word mushtari mean?
A buyer.
Or?
A star.
So kawkab doesn't mean star. Kawkab means planet. And which specific planet is this referring to? Jupiter. Yeah. So Jupiter is called Al-Mushtari. وقولنا بائن فإنه يحتمل البين والبيان. So what are the two meanings of ba'in?
Between.
Oh, sorry, again?
Between.
Between.
Vein. I don't know.
No. Yeah, so the two meanings are either to clarify something, it's related to bayan, okay, or to separate. Like we have talaq ba'in, right? We say talaq ba'in, so that means to create a separation. Okay. Another example that's used, so I already used the example of spring in English. Another example in Arabic would be the word ayn. What does the word ayn mean?
Eye.
Okay. What else does ayn mean?
Spring. Spy.
Gold.
Okay. It means eye. It means the letter ayn as in the letter of the alphabet. It means spring. It means spy. It means to guard. It means self. Like you say bi'aynihi, like by itself. It means a chief. It means most beautiful. It means, you know, wal-aynu haqq, the evil eye. It's also the headlight of a car. Okay, it's called ayn because it's the eye of the car. Ayn can mean an individual. Ayn can also be the second radical of the verb, like, you know, fa'ala, right? It's the second letter of the verb. So lots of meanings to the word ayn. So when I say ayn, you have to ask me, like, which ayn am I referring to? Okay. Let's continue. وحكم المشترك.
وحكم المشترك أنه إذا تعين الواحد مرادا به سقط اعتبار إرادة غيره، ولهذا أجمع العلماء رحمهم الله تعالى على أن لفظ القروء المذكورة في كتاب الله تعالى محمول إما على الحيض كما هو مذهبنا أو على الطهر كما هو مذهب الشافعي رحمه الله.
Okay, without reading the translation, what does this mean? أنه إذا تعين الواحد مرادا به سقط الاعتبار إرادته غيره.
If they mean one thing, it excludes the others.
Exactly. So what it means is that when we have a mushtarak word, we're going to find that it has one particular meaning. We're going to discard all the other meanings. So if I tell you, when I use the word ayn, when I use the word spring, it meant the season, you're automatically going to assume all the other meanings have dropped. And you're not going to, when I say, I love spring, okay, that makes it very easy. I don't know, when I use one word, then you automatically know the other meanings do no longer apply because obviously I meant it in one context, in one meaning. So all the other meanings have to go away. So that's why we say, ولهذا أجمع العلماء, that the ulama have consensus on this, رحمهم الله, على أن لفظ القروء, the word قروء المذكورة, which was mentioned in the past, في كتاب الله تعالى, in the book of Allah, محمول, that it carry, what does the word mahmul here mean?
Possibility.
Yeah, but what does hamala mean?
To carry.
To carry. So it kind of means when we say hamala, it means to carry, like it could be to carry something in your hand, or to carry a baby, for example. But it can also mean, when we use it in the context here, it could mean to carry the meaning. To have the meaning of, okay? So mahmulun imma ala al-hayd, so it's either going to refer to hayd, كما هو مذهبنا, like the Hanafis think, أو على الطهر, or purity, كما هو مذهب الشافعي, rahimahullah, as is the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. So it either means purity or it means menstruation. It cannot mean both at the same time. You have to choose one. You can't be like, well, it means both. Yeah, it means both linguistically, but from a fiqh standpoint, you have to choose one and stick with it. Okay? We have to choose one. When something's mushtarak, you either have to choose one, and if you're unable to choose one, then you cannot act on it. But this is something in the Quran, and so of course you just have to choose one. Okay, continue.
وقال أبو حنيفة ومحمد رحمهما الله إذا أوصى لموالي بني فلان ولبني فلان موال من أعلى وموال من أسفل بطلت الوصية في حق الفريقين لاستحالة الجمع بينهما وعدم الرجحان.
Okay, so قال أبو حنيفة ومحمد رحمهما الله that Imam Abu Hanifa and Muhammad al-Shaybani said, إذا أوصى لموالي بني فلان. Someone takes their will and they do wasiyah, so they say up to 1/3. I'm going to bequeath to the mawali of so and so, whatever. وَلِبَنِي فُلَانٍ مَوَالٍ مِنْ أَعْلَى وَمَوَالٍ مِنْ أَسْفَلٍ. What does that mean? Without looking at the translation. What's a mawla?
A master,
Or?
a freed slave.
Yes. So it has a meaning and it has the opposite meaning.
Mm.
And so when someone says, I'm leaving wealth, bequeathing it to the mawali above and the mawali below, what they mean is well, sorry, they didn't say that. They just said, I'm leaving it for the mawali. So the question is, this person happened to have wali bani fulanin mawalin min a'la wa mawalin min asfal. They have people that they have someone who freed them, and they have someone who they freed. So the question becomes, which one is being referred to? The one that freed them or the one that they freed? بطلت الوصية في حق الفريقين لاستحالة الجمع بينهما وعدم الرجحان. Then the entire wasiyah is going to be null and void and will not be given to either group because of the impossibility to figure out which of the two is being referred to. Okay, so when it's mushtarak, we're trying to figure out which it is. In the previous discussion of quru, the Hanafis took certain evidences, said it's hayd. The Shafi'is took certain evidences, said it's tuhur. So you came up with an answer. There was an answer. Is there a possibility the answer is wrong? Yes, there's a possibility the answer is wrong, but they've at least come up with an answer. In this particular situation, you're stuck where you don't know whether to prefer the mawalin min a'la or mawalin min asfal. So you have nothing you can do. Therefore, the entire bequest becomes completely void. Nobody gets anything. Okay? Next example.
وقال أبو حنيفة رحمه الله إذا قال لزوجته أنت علي مثل أمي لا يكون مظاهرا لأن اللفظ مشترك بين الكرامة والحرمة فلا يترجح جهة الحرمة إلا بالنية.
Okay. Like as we go through this chapter, for most of these concepts, there's one or two examples only, right? So there's one example where the mushtarak word, some people took one evidence and they took one opinion, some other people took another evidence, they made it another opinion. So that was the example of quru. Second example that we did was this one of mawali min asfal and a'la, and the mawalin from asfal and a'la, and we said that we couldn't figure out which one it was, so it stayed mushtarak, and we couldn't do any interpretation of it. Now we're doing another example. And this one, Imam Abu Hanifa says, if a man says to his wife, "Anti alayya mithlu ummi," you're like my mother to me. Okay. Now, when does al-zihar happen? Al-zihar happens when a man says to his wife, your back is like my mother's back to me, right? Like he's being very specific about the wording there. Here he just says, you're like my mother to me. Now, this can have two meanings. Because لأن اللفظ مشترك بين الكرامة والحرمة. He could mean, you're like my mother to me. I respect my mother so much for whatever, her intelligence, her character, the way she raises her kids or whatever. Similarly, I have respect for you because you're like that. You're amazing. Okay. Nothing wrong with saying that, right? Or he could mean, you're like my mother to me, just like I would not want to have intimacy with her. I don't want to have intimacy with you, which would be hurma, which would be lihar. So the problem that happened here is when he says, Anti alayya mithlu ummi, we don't know which one he means. Does he mean a good kind of like my ummi or a bad kind of like my ummi? So, فَلَا يَتَرَجَّحُ جِهَةُ الْحُرْمَةِ إِلَّا بِالنِّيَّةِ. So that's why we say لا يكون مظاهرا. So we say we don't know if this is lihar or it's not lihar because we don't know the intention. So then we have to ask and say, what's your intention behind saying those words? And if he says, oh, I was just expressing respect, okay, great. Then it's just respect, not a problem. If he says, oh, I meant I don't want to have intimacy with you like I don't want to have it with my mother, then we say, oh, okay, now lihar just took place. So when he says the words, we don't know what it means. We ask for the intention. Once the intention becomes clear, then it's mushtarak, right? Then it becomes mufassar, because then he has clarified, is it this or is it that? Continue.
وعلى هذا قلنا لا يجب النظير في جزاء الصيد لقوله تعالى فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم لأن المثل مشترك بين المثل صورة وبين المثل معنى وهو القيمة وقد أريد المثل من حيث المعنى بهذا النص في قتل الحمام والعصفور ونحوهما بالاتفاق فلا يراد المثل من حيث الصورة إذ لا عموم للمشترك أصلا فيسقط اعتبار الصورة لاستحالة الجمع.
Okay. So this situation is referring to the verse in the Quran where Allah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقتلوا الصيد وأنتم حرم. While you are in the state of ihram, وأنتم حرم, لا تقتلوا الصيد. Like, don't go and hunt. Okay, don't go killing animals, don't hunt animals. Then he continues and Allah says, وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ مُتَعَمِّدًا. And then whoever does this, whoever kills an animal intentionally while you're in the state of ihram, فَجَزَاءُ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ. فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ. Then the compensation for your killing is similar to the thing that you killed. Not even similar. Yeah, similar or equivalent. The word mithl, maybe better translation is equivalent. Equivalent to the thing that you killed. Okay. Now, I want you to write this down. There's two types of equivalence that can be had. One is al-mithl as-suri. Al-mithl as-suri, which means that something that is equivalent to it in surah means what? In appearance. Something that is equivalent to it in appearance. Al-mithl as-suri. The second type of mithl is al-mithl al-ma'nawi. Al-mithl al-ma'nawi. This means it's not going to be the same in appearance. It's not going to be equivalent in appearance. It'll be equivalent in value. The qima is the same. Okay. So now you go off, you're a pilgrim, and you kill a goat. If you killed a goat, what can you do that's al-mithl as-suri to the goat?
Find one that looks similar or equivalent.
Find a similar goat, similar size, whatever, and say, I'm going to give this goat as a recompense, right? Or you could find a deer. Okay, so a deer would also be like a goat, similar. Okay. Al-mithl al-ma'nawi would be say, oh, I killed the goat. Let me figure out the value of a goat. In the market, it's $200. Okay, then I need to give $200 as jaza for it. Okay? But here's the problem. This verse of the Quran now, فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ. So if I have a goat, I can find another goat. But the scholars agree that what if it's a pigeon? Or what if it's a sparrow or something like that? What do we do in that situation? Okay, so let's read this. وعلى هذا قلنا لا يجب النظير في جزاء الصيد لقوله تعالى فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم لأن المثل مشترك بين المثل صورة وبين المثل معنى وهو القيمة. So we know we already said المثل المعنوي is equal to the value. So now we have two possibilities. This situation is mushtarak. When Allah says مثل ما قتل, does it mean al-mithl al-suri or al-mithl al-ma'nawi? That's what we're trying to figure out. Is it al-mithl al-suri or al-mithl al-ma'nawi? وقد أريد المثل من حيث المعنى بهذا النص في قتل الحمام والعصفور ونحوهما بالاتفاق. Okay, so there's consensus of the scholars, the Shafi'is, the Malikis, the Hanbalis, the Hanafis, everybody agrees that if it was hamam or usfur, if it was like a pigeon, a sparrow, something like that, then it's going to be al-mithl al-ma'nawi. You're going to go with al-mithl al-ma'nawi. فلا يراد المثل من حيث الصورة إذ لا عموم لمشترك أصلا فيسقط اعتبار الصورة لاستحالة الجمع. So if everybody agrees that when it's a pigeon or a sparrow or something like that, that it's going to be al-mithl al-ma'nawi, then we can't say when it's a goat or a deer that it's going to be al-mithl al-suri, because then what we're doing is, well, sometimes it's al-mithl al-ma'nawi and sometimes it's al-mithl al-suri, and that would make it mushtarak. And you're trying to combine both meanings at the same time. So we have to choose one of the meanings. And so we go and we say, okay, it's mu'awwal. And because the birds have to be ma'nawi, the goats and the deer also have to be ma'nawi. So 100% of the time, this is al-mithl al-ma'nawi. Because we can't have both meanings at the same time. We have to choose one of the two meanings. Okay? Let's continue.
تعريف المؤول ثم إذا ترجح بعض وجوه المشترك بغالب الرأي يصير مؤولا وحكم المؤول وجوب العمل به مع احتمال الخطأ.
ثم إذا ترجح بعض وجوه المشترك بغالب الرأي يصير مؤولا. So if you end up choosing a meaning, like we've done in many of these cases, we just chose al-mithl al-ma'nawi for the previous example. We chose uru means hayd in another previous example. And so whenever we make a choice like that, then that is called mu'awwal. We said that at the very beginning. So يصير مؤولا وحكم المؤول. And so when something is مؤول وجوب العمل به, you have to act upon it مع احتمال الخطأ, while it carries the possibility that you could be wrong. Okay, there's a possibility that there's a mistake. It's not قطعي, it's ظني. Okay, continue.
ومثاله في الحكميات ما قلنا إذا أطلق الثمن في البيع كان على غالب نقد البلد وذلك بطريق التأويل ولو كانت النقود مختلفة فسد البيع لما ذكرنا.
Okay, مثاله في الحكميات. So one of the examples of this is ما قلنا إذا أطلق الثمن في البيع كان على غالب نقد البلد وذلك بطريق التأويل. So let's say you come to me and you say you want to buy this book from me. You say, how much will you sell it for? I say 10. What does 10 mean?
Dollars.
$10. Is it 10 US dollars or Canadian dollars or Australian dollars or some other dollars?
US dollars.
Okay. Is it possible I meant Canadian?
Yes,
Maybe.
but unlikely.
Yes, exactly. So we go with the غالب, right? So we go with في البيع كان غالب نقد البلدي. What's the common currency of transaction in the US? It's US dollars. If I said 10, I probably mean 10 US dollars. Maybe I'm from Canada. Maybe I always think Canadian. Maybe I spent all my life in Canada. And maybe I just came here to the US for 2 days and I said 10 and you thought I meant 10 US dollars, but I meant 10 Canadian dollars. Yes, all of those things are possibilities. Maybe like for once I just meant Canadian dollars for some reason. Maybe I meant 10 cents. Maybe I don't care about this book. I don't value it at all. And so maybe I meant 10 cents and you thought it's $10 and there's some confusion there. But by default, it's mushtarak. We don't know what I mean when I say 10, but the default is you're going to assume that it's the common currency, you're going to assume it's $10. And then وذلك بطريقة التأويل, so it's مؤول. You have a lot of evidence to believe it should be $10 US, no pennies or anything like that. But ولو كانت okay, it's تأويل, right? It's مؤول. There's a possibility, there's احتمال of خطأ, okay? And then ولو كانت النقود مختلفة فسد البيع لما ذكرنا. Okay, what if we are in another country? I don't know if Canada would qualify. Let's say you're in Canada at the Canadian border, okay? Like city of Windsor or something like that, or like Niagara Falls. And so sometimes what happens is when you go to those stores, like right at the border, and they say, oh, this is dollars, you have to ask, you mean Canadian dollars or US dollars? Okay. So if multiple currencies are in circulation and all of them are in use, and it's unclear which one's being used, then what happens is the transaction is going to be void because it was unclear. So you have to be very, very clear and say 10 Canadian dollars or 10 US dollars. So I don't know if it actually applies in Canada, but like imagine a country, and there are countries like this, where multiple countries are in circulation. I think one place I remember in Turkey, some places you go, they take lira, and some places actually they take euro. What's really confusing to me is the Turkish lira sign and the euro sign are like very similar to each other. It's very hard to tell the difference between which one's which, but there's places where they'll take lira or euro, and you're like, which one do you mean? So it's a little bit confusing. Okay, so if we don't know, if there's multiple currencies, we don't know which is being referred to, then you can't have a mu'awwal until you have a mufassar, like somebody says, oh, this is what the currency is, then it becomes mufassar. But if there's only one currency, you're going to go with the mu'awwal. Continue.
بعض التفريعات: وحمل الأقراء على الحيض، وحمل النكاح في الآية على الوطء، وحمل الكنايات حال مذاكرة الطلاق على الطلاق من هذا القبيل. وعلى هذا قلنا الدين المانع من الزكاة يصرف إلى أيسر المالين قضاء للدين. وفرع محمد رحمه الله على هذا فقال: إذا تزوج امرأة على نصاب وله نصاب من الغنم ونصاب من الدراهم يصرف الدين إلى الدراهم، حتى لو حال عليه الحول يجب الزكاة عنده في نصاب الغنم ولا تجب في الدراهم.
Okay. Actually, let's continue this after a short break. So let's continue at 8:45, inshallah. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Let's take this piece by piece. بعد تفريعات. What's تفريعات?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
تفريعات is like to derives derivation.
Okay, good. What does I'm going to write down some words here in the chat. So what do all of these mean?
I don't see anything.
Oh, I can't do that because I'm not host. Okay, never mind. I'll say it. The word تخريج, the word تفريع, and the word تأصيل. What is تخريج, what is تفريع, and what is تأصيل?
تخريج is to extract a rule from a dalil. تفريع is to derive it. تفريع is to derive fiqh from usul. And تأصيل is to derive usul from furu'.
Okay, very good. تفريع is to derive something that's a far' from an asl, and تأصيل is to derive an asl from a far'. تخريج is something more am than that. So a lot of times people say تخريج means to derive, but that's not exactly what it means. خرج يخرج is to extract something, right? So you take something out of something. And تفريع is a type of تخريج. تأصيل is a type of تخريج as well. We will say that when we go through books of hadith and we find like a particular hadith, what does it mean to do takhrij of hadith? Takhrij of hadith means you take a particular hadith and you say, oh, let me see if I can find it in Bukhari. Do I find it in Muslim? Do I find it in Musnad Ahmad? Do I find it in Sunan al-Tirmidhi? So you find it everywhere. That's takhrij. You're trying to extract it. Similarly, we say Imam Bukhari, he did takhrij of this hadith in his book, meaning he brought it into, he extracted it into his book. Okay, so it just means to pull something out of something. Tafri' is a type of takhrij. Ta'sil is a type of takhrij. And sometimes we use the word takhrij to mean tafri'. And that's what you meant, Zian. Sometimes we'll use the word takhrij when we actually just mean tafri'. So, ba'du tafri'at, what are some of the things that we can derive from this? What are some of the sub-principles, or what are some of the branches or some of the secondary issues that we can derive now that we've created this idea of mushtarak and mu'awwal and mufassar? Okay. وحمل الأقراء على الحيض. So we know that for the Hanafis, when we use the word qur, or that particular ayah in the Quran, it means hayd. Right? So that particular ayah, that particular verse, when we say thalathata quru, which we've talked about before, for the Hanafis, it has one meaning based on the evidences, and that meaning is mu'awwal, while acknowledging the fact that it's not 100% certain, right? Okay. Then we have وحمل النكاح في الآية على الوطء. Anyone know what this is talking about? In the verse that we've referred to before, near the bottom of the page in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ. What does the word تَنْكِحَ mean in that context? Because the word نَكَحَ is mushtarak. The word nakaha can mean marriage, and the word nakaha can mean intercourse, okay? It has both meanings. And so in that particular context, the Hanafis have said that the word means intercourse and not marriage. Why? Because they said, if I say فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ, well, zawj already means marriage, like someone I'm married to. Why would you repeat yourself and be redundant and say to marry someone who you've married? Okay, so they say it means to have relations with someone who you have marry. من بعد حتى تنكح, to have relations, زوجا غيره, with your new spouse, other than the original spouse. And also, if you remember, this was the verse that we used to prove that you don't need the hadith, right? That the Quran itself is acting as evidence to show that you need to have relations. You can't just get married, you have to have relations. Okay, so the word nikah in this, that's why we're saying وَحَمْلُ النِّكَاحِ فِي الْآيَةِ. In this particular verse, the word nikah is على الوطء. It means like relations. Okay. وحمل الكنايات حال مذاكرة الطلاق على الطلاق من هذا القبيل. And so the word when the وحمل الكنايات, what is this referring to, kinayat here?
Like the phrases used
For
to
divorce.
divorce.
Yeah, for divorce, but yeah. So what we're talking about, وحمل الكنايات, the kinayat phrases that are used, the words that aren't super clear about the intent of the speaker. حال مذاكرة الطلاق, when we're talking about divorce, عن على الطلاق, that it means طلاق من هذا القبيل. So the word, what we're talking about is the word ba'in, right? The word ba'in is mushtarak between clarity and between separation. And so if the word ba'in is used, you don't know if it's talking about clarity or it's talking about separation. However, let's say we're having a discussion about divorce, like my wife and I were having a discussion, divorce this, divorce that, and then that is like, okay, and then you say something and you say the word ba'in. The word ba'in in that context, like remember in art class, the spring for you by default meant a body of water. And in physics class, the spring for you by default meant the coil spring. So by default, the word ba'in is going to mean separation because the entire discussion was about divorce. Okay, so that's what the word ba'in is going to mean in that context. وعلى هذا قلنا, and based on this we say الدين المانع من الزكاة يصرف إلى أيسر المالين قضاء للدين. So let's say you have debt that's due. I owe somebody. And I also happen to have a variety of different types of assets. So let's say I have gold and I have some silver and I have some cattle and I have some real estate, investment real estate, and I have some stocks in the stock market. I have all these different things, okay? But I owe somebody money. I have debt that's due upon me. I have more than the nisab worth of gold, more than the nisab worth of silver, more than the nisab worth of real estate, more than the nisab worth of stocks, more than nisab worth of cryptocurrency, all of these things. And let's bring it into today's world. And I have more than the nisab worth of US dollars sitting in cash. So I have cash, I have gold, I have real estate, I have stocks, I have cattle. I have all of these things. I have so many different assets. I'm a really wealthy man. Which one of those am I going to subtract the debt out of to say, okay, let's see if it falls below the nisab and I don't have to pay the zakat on that one? Which one am I going to do that out of? Thoughts on that without looking at the book? Because I don't have to pay zakat on money that I owe, right? But do I do that out of the gold or the cattle or the crypto or the real estate or the dollars, or which one do I subtract that from?
Is it from the lesser type of wealth?
What do you mean by the lesser type?
like lesser in value, maybe.
Okay. Any other opinions? That's
Yeah.
a possibility, right? We're just trying to ijtihad here. Like which one should we subtract the debt out of? So in the Hanafi method, what we say is ad-daynul mani'u. Why is it called ad-daynul mani'u? Because that debt is preventing zakat from being paid. It's a mani' to zakat. So if I had $10,000 worth of cash, let's say that's all I had, $10,000 worth of cash, and I owe someone 1,000, I would subtract that 1,000, and it would act as a mani', so I don't give zakat on that. I only give zakat on the 9,000, right? الدين المانع من الزكاة يصرف إلى أيسر المالين قضاء للدين. It's going to be from the easiest one to pay the debt from. So if I had cattle, I would have to go to the market and sell the cattle. And maybe, let's say I have a sheep and the sheep is worth $300 in the market and I only owe $10. Well, I don't want to sell a whole sheep and have the difficulty of going to the market, selling the sheep, getting 300 and then paying off 10. If I have real estate, again, same problem. If I have even like other things. So the easiest one to liquidate is the cash because I already have the cash. So it's already liquidated. I don't have to go to the market. I don't have to do anything. It's the easiest thing to subtract the debt from when I'm calculating my zakat. So that's how we're going to do it. Okay, because it was mushtarak. It was mushtarak. Which one do I subtract the debt out of? And I go with the aysar. That's the answer to that. It's the mu'awwal. The mu'awwal is that I go with the aysar. وفرح محمد رحمه الله على هذا. And Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, he further thought about this in another area, and he said, فقال إذا تزوج امرأة على نصاب. If a man marries a woman and he sets the mahar to be the nisab, وله نصاب من الغنم, he has nisab equivalent of cattle, من الدراهم, وله نصاب من الغنم ونصاب من الدراهم. So he has nisab of cattle and he has nisab of dirhams. Now in our time you would just say dollars, right? يصرف الدين إلى الدراهم حتى لو حال عليه الحول يجب الزكاة عنده في نصاب الغنم ولا تجب في الدراهم. So now that he owes her the mahar. So it's mahar that he hasn't paid yet. He owes her the mahar, and he has nisab worth of cattle, and he has nisab worth of dirhams. He's going to pay the zakat now that when the hawl passes, when 1 year passes by, a lunar year passes by, he's going to pay the zakat from the cattle, but he's not going to pay the zakat from the dirhams because he owes that to his wife. Okay. Continue reading, please.
تعريف المفسر ولو ترجح بعض وجوه المشترك ببيان من قبل المتكلم كان مفسرا.
Okay, so we discussed this before. When something is mushtarak, either you're figuring it out and it's mu'awwal, or the speaker gives you the clear answer, and that becomes mufassar. وَلَوْ تَرَجَّحَ بَعْضُ وُجُوهِ الْمُشْتَرَكِ بِبَيَانٍ مِنْ قِبَلِ الْمُتَكَلِّمِ, from the speaker themselves. كَانَ مُفَسَّرًا. This is going to become mufassar. And at this point, this is qat'i, right? The speaker themselves clarified it for you. وَحُكْمُهُ
وحكمه أنه يجب العمل به يقينا، مثاله إذا قال لفلان علي 10 دراهم من نقد بخارى، فقوله من نقد بخارى تفسير له، فلولا ذلك لكان منصرفا إلى غالب نقد البلد بطريق التأويل، فيترجح المفسر فلا يجب نقد البلد.
Okay, so the hukum of mufassar is يجب العمل به يقينا. You're certain of it now, unlike the mu'awwal where you were interpreting. The mufassar, the speaker clarified, so you're certain it's qat'i. مثاله, in the example is إذا قال لفلان علي 10 دراهم من نقد بخارى. I owe you 10 dirhams from 10 Bukharan dirhams. Okay, I owe you 10 Bukharan dirhams. So now you know it's not some other dirhams, it's dirhams of Bukhara. فقوله من نقد بخارى تفسير له. It became mufassar. If I just said I owe you 10 dirhams, then it was going to be mu'awwal, that it's Bukharan, because let's say you're in Bukhara. It was going to be mu'awwal, but now you've made it mufassar by making it very clear, نقد of Bukhara. فلولا ذلك لكان منصرفا إلى غالب نقد البلد طريق التأويل فيترجع المفسر فلا يجب نقد البلد. So let's say I'm not in Bukhara and I'm in some other city and I say I owe you 10 Bukharan dirhams, it's going to be 10 Bukharan dirhams. It doesn't matter what city you're in. So if I'm selling you this book and I say this is for 10 Canadian dollars, it's going to be 10 Canadian dollars because at that point it's mufassar. And if I just said it's for 10, then it would have been mu'awwal and you would have thought it's US dollars. Any questions on mushtarak, when something stays mushtarak, and then when it becomes mu'awwal and when it becomes mufassar? Any questions on any of that? Let's move on to فصل في الحقيقة والمجاز. So we've completed mushtarak and mu'awwal. I think given that we've completed mushtarak and mu'awwal, what we should do next time is have an exam. And that exam should cover everything we started from the beginning. And then it'll include am and khas and mutlaq and muqayyad and mushtarak and mu'awwal. Okay, so let's do that next time inshallah, but let's continue. فصل في الحقيقة والمجاز. So you have haqiqa and we have majaz. So before we get into it, what does haqiqa mean to you and what does majaz mean to you?
حقيقة is reality, real, and majaz is metaphorical.
Okay, so oftentimes the word haqiqa is like, I think you're correct from a linguistic perspective. Haqiqa means the reality, right? And majaz means something that's metaphorical. In fact, even when you look at it on this page, it says faslun fil haqiqati wal majazi, the literal and the metaphorical expressions. However, even though we call it haqiqa and majaz, which could mean like literal and metaphorical, I want you to pay attention to the definitions because that's not exactly what the definitions say. The definitions are going to say the haqiqa is the original meaning that was given to a word, and the majaz is the secondary meaning that was given to that word. Okay, so the haqiqa is the original meaning and the majaz is a secondary meaning. So if I say, Zian, man, I saw you yesterday. Wow, you were acting like a lion. What does that mean?
So this would be majaz, right? Your metaphor, see me.
Maybe majaz. What does it mean?
Like I was acting brave, probably.
Yeah, brave and courageous, right? It doesn't mean you were like, roaring like a lion and walking around in arms and legs like four-leg animal or something like that, right? And sometimes we'll say things like, so acting like a lion, fine, it's clear it's a simile. But what if I said, man, Zian was a lion yesterday? We speak like that as well. And it just means like you were really courageous and brave. So originally the word meant, the word lion, the original meaning of lion is an animal that's, orangish in color and lives in the jungle and, is the king of the jungle and all that stuff. And then it also got this meaning of brave and courageous. In this particular case, yes, the literal meaning is the animal. And yes, it is metaphorically, it means courageous. But sometimes there's just a word. It doesn't have to be literal and metaphorical. It has a primary meaning that it was given intentionally and a secondary meaning that it was given later. So let's go through the definitions. تعريف الحقيقة and تعريف المجاز.
تعريف الحقيقة كل لفظ وضعه واضع اللغة بإزاء شيء فهو حقيقة له. تعريف المجاز.
Okay, that's fine.
ولو استعمل في غيره يكون مجازا لا حقيقة.
Okay, so تعريف الحقيقة كل لفظ, every word, وضعه, which was put in place, واضع اللغة, by the putter of the language. Sorry, that's really bad. The book says the lexicographer, but that word's too big for me. So the putter of the language or the creator of the language, بإزاء شيء فهو حقيقة له. To like talk to refer to a certain thing, okay, and that is its حقيقة meaning. Who is the لغة? Who is the واضع اللغة? The way that this definition sounds like is as if like somebody like sat there like created the language. Languages don't really work like that. Like it's not like somebody sits down and like, hey, I'm going to make a new language and then I'm going to make this word haqiqa and this word majaz or something. Reality is languages are like, there's different ways languages came about, and you can study the history of languages, but there isn't necessarily a wadi'ul lugha. There isn't necessarily a very consistent, proper, thought process or methodology that a language might be created by. Certainly the Arabic language is so awesome when you look at the sarf and how different words are derived from each other and how the roots work and all of that. It feels like somebody sat down and created it with deep thought. Like they spent years and years in, thinking about the language before it came about. But reality is like, it's not necessarily like there's one person who sat down and said, hey, I'm going to create a haqiqa meaning for asad, which means lion. And I'm going to create a majaz meaning, which means someone who's, has shuja', brave or something like that. تعريف المجاز ولو استعمل في غيره يكون مجازا لا حقيقة. And I think this is the key point. When that word is used for some meaning other than what the original meaning was, it becomes majaz. Doesn't have to be metaphorical. It just has to be any other meaning that's given to it that makes it majaz. And we're going to see examples where it's not necessarily metaphorical. It's just like it's related. It's definitely related. The majaz meaning is related to the haqiqa, but it's just a secondary meaning that's given to it. حكمهما
حكمهما ثم الحقيقة مع المجاز لا يجتمعان إرادة من لفظ واحد في حالة واحدة.
So similar to the mushtarak, we're going to lay down a principle. And the principle we're laying down is الحقيقة مع المجاز. You have if a word has a haqiqa meaning and a majaz meaning, لا يجتمعان إرادة من لفظ واحد في حالة واحدة. So if I use a word, if I say Zian was a lion, I either mean he's literally a lion, like he's an animal, or I mean he's brave and courageous. Do you see why it can't mean both at the same time? Like it has to be one of those two meanings. In that context, I either mean he's literally a lion. Like if I wanted to insult him, maybe I'll call him a donkey or something, right? But then I'm literally saying he's a donkey, right? It can't mean at the same time, oh no, he's like, I either mean it majazan or I mean it haqiqatan. Both meanings can't apply at the same time. Does that make sense? Kind of like the mushtarak, like both meanings don't apply at the same time. And that's the main rule. The main principle is you either mean one or you mean the other. مثاله
مثاله ولهذا لما أريد ما يدخل في الصاع بقوله عليه السلام لا تبيع الدرهم بالدرهمين ولا الصاع بالصاعين سقط اعتبار نفس الصاع حتى جاز بيع الواحد منه بالاثنين ولما أريد الوقاع من آية الملامسة سقط اعتبار إرادة المس باليد.
Okay. So now that we know that a word, when it's used in a sentence, you either mean the haqiqa or you mean the majaz, we can come up with some examples. ولهذا, based on this, لما أريد ما يدخل في الصاع بقوله عليه السلام. The Prophet ﷺ, there's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, which is mentioned. I don't know which book it's in actually, so I don't remember which book the hadith is in. But the Prophet ﷺ said, and there's many variations of this hadith. Actually, this one is from Musnad of Abdul Razak. But you don't have to go to the Musnad of Abdul Razak. This is also found in Musnad Ahmad. I know that for sure. There's a version of this hadith in Musnad Ahmad for sure. Where the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبيعوا الدرهم بالدرهمين ولا الصاع بالصاعين. Do not trade one dirham for 2 dirhams, and do not trade 1 sa' for 2 sa's. What's a sa'?
A measure of something.
Container.
Okay, we've got 2 different meanings here. So one person says it's a container, and the other person said it's a measure of 2.6 kilograms, okay? So which one is it? First of all, the word sa' by itself, forget this context. What does the word sa' mean? So the word sa' itself can be 2.6 kilograms of volume, right? It's a cubic measure of volume. Not volume, it's a cubic measure of weight, I guess. It's a weight. Actually, there's anyway, let's just leave it as weight. I don't want to get into the technical issues here. So it's either a measure of something or it's a container, right? We know that it's both of those meanings apply. So my question for you then becomes, and without reading the translation or the text, just looking at the hadith, لا تبيع الدرهم بالدرهمين ولا الصاع بالصاعين. What did the Prophet ﷺ mean here, الصاع بالصاعين? Did he mean the measure or did he mean the container?
I would say the measure.
The measure, right? Because otherwise he's saying, if you have a container, a sa', and you have two containers here, a sa' here and two sa's here, these are just containers. They have nothing in them. Don't trade one of these for two of these, okay? But that's not what he was referring to. He means don't take a sa' of wheat and trade it with two sa's of wheat. Don't take a sa' of barley and trade it with two sa's of barley, okay? That's what he was meaning. And we kind of know that, right? Like we know that's what he meant. He didn't mean literal containers. He meant containers of something that's measurable, like the amount, like quantities, okay? So we have to figure out what does sa' mean here. Is it the haqiqa meaning or the majaz? The haqiqa meaning of sa' is the container. The majaz meaning is a measure of something that's 2.6 kilograms. سقط اعتبار نفس الصاع. So we don't consider this hadith to be referring to the actual container. حتى جاز بيع الواحد منه بالاثنين. You can actually, you're allowed to trade one size for two size, no problem. Okay. So what we're saying is the sa' in that means what goes inside it. ولهذا لما أريد ما يدخل في الصاع بقوله عليه السلام. What is inside the sa', and then we say سقط اعتبار نفس الصاع. So we're not looking at the sa' itself, the haqiqa meaning, we're looking at the majaz meaning. Any questions on that? Okay. ولما أريد الوقاع من آية الملامسة سقط اعتبار إرادة المس باليد. So in the ayah, Allah says, Zion, what's the verse? When Allah, أو لامستم النساء, right?
Mhm.
So Allah says that you will break your wudu. Like you have to deal with tahara when you have لامستم النساء, right? So what does mulamasa mean? Mulamasa could mean literal touching of, just like touching, or it could mean, or it's majaz, like when you say, did you touch your wife? It could mean metaphorically, it could mean majazan, it could mean having wiqa', right? To have relations with your spouse. So the word, when we say lamastumun nisa, are we referring to a literal touch or a majazi touch? It cannot mean both at the same time. So the Shafi'is took it to mean a literal touch,
Mhm.
and the Hanafis took it to mean a majazi touch. But it cannot be both. It has to be one or the other. Okay. Let's continue.
قال محمد رحمه الله: إذا أوصى لمواليه وله موال أعتقهم ولمواليه موال أعتقوهم كانت الوصية لمواليه دون مواليه.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. So if I say, let's say I do a wasiyah to my mawali, like the people whom I freed. These are slaves that I freed. Okay, let's say nobody freed me. This is very clear. I freed slaves, and then they freed slaves, and they freed slaves, and they freed slaves. Okay, so there's a chain. When we use the word mawali, it actually means, there's two meanings to the word mawali. Okay, let's use a simpler example. When I use the word ummahat, mothers, what does that mean, literally? Yeah, or if I say like, yeah, if I just use the word ummi or ummahat, ummahati, what does that mean?
Just mothers.
Yeah, but who are your mothers, Zainab?
Is it referring to the mothers of the believers?
That would be ummahatul mu'minin more specifically. So just the word ummahat.
My mother?
Yeah, so haqiqatan, when you say my mother, it means your mother.
Mm.
But majazan, it means your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-great-great-great-grandmother. Like, it just, the chain goes on. Okay, it goes on forever. So haqiqa meaning would be my mother. So, and then the majaz meaning would be your mother's mother and all those others included. So when he says mawali, it's similar. It haqiqatan, it means the slaves that you freed, but majazan, it means also the slaves that they freed and the slaves that they freed and the slaves that they freed. Okay, so it kind of goes on and on and on. So what we're saying is وَلَهُ مَوَالٍ أَعْتَقَهُم, he has slaves that he freed. وَلِمَوَالِهِ مَوَالٍ أَعْتَقُوهُم, and then they have slaves that they freed. كانت الوصية لمواليه دون موالي مواليه. This wasiyah is going to be for the haqiqa meaning, because by default we go for haqiqa. And so it's going to mean the slaves that he freed, not the slaves that they freed and the slaves that they freed, and so on and so forth. Okay, we stop at the first one, we go with the haqiqa meaning, not the majaz. وفي السير الكبير, and in his book السير الكبير, Imam Muhammad says,
لو استأمن أهل الحرب على آبائهم لا تدخل الأجداد في الأمان ولو استأمنوا على أمهاتهم لا يثبت الأمان في حق الجدات.
so he's saying that if you're at war with somebody and then you make a peace agreement and you say, can you please be at peace with us and our fathers? Again, the word aba means your fathers. Okay, so it's these people's fathers. And then that's the haqiqa meaning. The majaz meaning also includes the grandfathers and the great-grandfathers and above, so on like that. So we're saying, لو استأمن أهل الحرب على آبائهم, they say, hey, can you please give peace and safety to our fathers? لا تدخل الأجداد. Their grandfathers are not going to be included في الأماني. ولو استأمنوا على أمهاتهم, if they say the mothers, لا يثبت الأمان في حق الجدات. This doesn't include the grandmothers and the great-grandmothers, okay? So we go with the haqiqa meaning, which is fathers only and mothers only, not the grandparents and the great-grandparents and so on. وعلى هذا,
وعلى هذا قلنا إذا أوصى لأبكار بني فلان لا تدخل المصابة بالفجور في حكم الوصية ولو أوصى لبني فلان وله بنون وبنو بنيه كانت الوصية لبنيه دون بني بنيه.
okay, so based on this, وعلى هذا قلنا إذا أوصى لأبكار بني فلان لا تدخل المصابة بالفجور في حكم الوصية. So someone says they're leaving money for the abkar, for the virgins. What's a virgin?
An unmarried woman.
Yes. So haqiqatan, it's an unmarried woman. Majazan, it means a woman who has not ever had intimate relations. Okay. So for example, if a woman commits adultery, haqiqatan, she's still from the abkar. Majazan, she is not from the abkar. She's like, as we would say in English, she's no longer a virgin, right? So we have to know the difference between the two. Abkar, haqiqatan, it has to do with marriage and not marriage. And then majazan means it has to do with, have you engaged in relations or not. And so when somebody says, I'm leaving this for abkar, we're going to go with the haqiqa meaning, which means are they married or not married? And we're not going to look at the fact that, oh, but this person, like, they committed adultery. We're going to ignore that, okay? ولو أوصى لبني فلان وله بنون وبنو بنيه كانت الوصية لبنيه دون بني بنيه. And if somebody says, I'm leaving my wealth to the children of such and such person, it's going to go to their haqiqa children, not the majaz children, because the majaz children would include grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all of that. So it's only going to go to the literal children, the haqiqa children, not the majaz children. Any questions so far?
Sheikh, so understanding or figuring out if the word means haqiqatan or majazan, you just understand it based on context or
Oh, good question. So we're on page 60. We're going to learn about 3 types of haqiqa. We're going to learn about haqiqa that's muta'azzira, haqiqa that's mahjura, and haqiqa that's musta'mala. And this is, I mean, this whole book is a simplified version of what's actually very complicated usul al-fiqh. So like everything we're learning here is like it's like a simpler version. Even though this is like a more advanced book, there's like even more advanced, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set a default principle. And the default principle will be that when a word is used, by default, we're going to assume it's haqiqa and not majaz. Because we don't want to get carried away with like, oh yeah, maybe Allah meant that metaphorically. Maybe it's this, maybe that. No, we're going to start by saying, by default, everything is going to be the haqiqa meaning. Unless we find reasons why it needs to be majaz. And that's what we're going to study for example, muta'azzira. If something is impossible, and then if something's going to be impossible, then we're not going to go with the haqiqa meaning, we're going to go with the majaz meaning, right? So we're going to learn all these different ways of when do we leave the haqiqa and go to the majaz. Then if you go to page 85. Page 85 says, فصل فيما يترك به حقائق الألفاظ. This one says, the chapter regarding those situations where we disregard or abandon the literal meanings of words. So what we're going to do is, it's an entire chapter where we study when do you take the haqiqa meaning and you don't care about the haqiqa meaning and you go for the majaz meaning. Okay, so what makes you leave the haqiqa and go towards majaz? And by the way, in that, we're going to learn that it doesn't always have to be majaz. We're going to learn there's such a thing as haqiqa. There's a haqiqa like qasira, which is also not haqiqa, but it's a subset of haqiqa. So we're going to learn that there's something else that's sort of like majaz as well. So it's going to get a bit more complicated. But my point to you here is that we will learn that there are times when you leave the haqiqa and you go for the majaz, or you leave the haqiqa and you go for haqiqa qasira. But that's going to happen because of some reason. That reason, for example, could be if I tell you, let's say I made a cup of coffee for you and I left it on the dining table. And then later I ask you, did you drink the cup? Okay, did you drink the cup? What do I mean by that? What's the literal meaning and what's the majaz meaning? And which meaning do you think I mean and why?
So did you drink the cup? You can't drink the cup.
Right. So the haqiqa meaning would mean I took the cup and I drank the cup itself. Majaz meaning is what?
You drank the coffee that's in the cup.
Okay. And which meaning did I mean?
The second one.
Because
it makes sense.
Yeah. And in page 60, we're going to learn because the haqiqa meaning is muta'azzira. It doesn't make any sense, right? So like it's impossible. It's impossible that I would have drank the cup. So what I mean is the contents of the cup. And so that's when we go to the majaz. So there's multiple reasons why we might go to majaz, but the principle I want you to remember first is the haqiqa is the default. And for you to go to majaz, you better have some reason, and then you better have some evidence to back up that reason. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So evidence would be like context or like it
The
can be
evidence would be like, for example, when we study muta'azzira, then we
Mm.
learn that certain types of statements are impossible. And if it's impossible, then the meaning might have been something else, right? Or it could have been mahjura, like it's not used that way anymore. So if I look at your car, Zian, and I say, man, your car is sick. What does that mean? What does that mean?
You're meaning you in that context, you mean like it looks really nice.
Right. But if I'd used that word sick like 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it would have meant like some negative comment about your car. Like, man, your car's like messed up or something.
Yeah.
So what happens is this is what we're going to study. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes the meaning has evolved, like that's how it's used in the common language. Sometimes that's the custom. So there's a variety of reasons why you might want to leave the haqiqa.
Mm.
And it's not always that it's impossible. It's just like you have to know. I mean, the simple answer to your question is yes, it's the context. Okay, that's the simple answer. But you can't just leave it there and be like, oh yeah, look, it's the context. You know from the context. You have to dig a little bit deeper and be like, hey, it's the context, but is it because it's obsolete? Is it because it's not used that way? Is it because it's impossible? Is it because there's some other qarina, some other evidence for it? There has to be some like reason. You have to be able to explain it in usul terms and not like if I asked you, why do you think it's majaz and not haqiqa? The answer better not be, oh, it's the context. That's a weak answer. It's an incomplete answer. It's a general answer. I want you to give a more specific answer. Say, oh yeah, because it's mahjura or it's muta'azzira or something like that. Does that make sense? Like you're gonna give a deeper, like kind of like if I say, what does the word quru mean? And in the Quran, and you say, oh, it means hayd, and then I'd be like, why? We're like, well, the Hanafi said so. Like, okay, well, that's a weak answer, right? The answer you need to give is like, well, there's a hadith, and it's this, and it's that, and that's what I mean. Like, yes, it's the context, but what about the context? And you can explain it more technically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, did we read this part yet? قال أصحابنا or no?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and read it, and we'll finish this, and that's where we'll end class. And we'll continue next time.
قال أصحابنا رحمهم الله لو حلف لا ينكح فلانة وهي أجنبية كان ذلك على العقد حتى لو زنى بها لا يحنث.
I sometimes really detest the examples they give in the book. قال أصحابنا, so our people, when we talked about this before, right? Who's أصحابنا?
The Hanafis.
الحنفيس رحمهم الله. لو حلف لا ينكح فلانة. Someone makes an oath, I'm not going to نكح this woman. وهي أجنبية, and she is non-mahram to him. So he says, I'm not going to nikah this woman. كان ذلك, now what does the word nikah mean? There's two meanings, right? What are the two meanings?
Marriage and intercourse.
Of course.
Marriage and intercourse. So what this means in this context is we're going to go with the meaning that he means marriage. كان ذلك على العقد means the marriage contract. حتى لو زنى بها لا يحنث. So if he actually goes and has relations with her without marriage, yeah, it's disgusting, it's bad, it's wrong, but he hasn't broken his oath. See I don't like the example? The example is like, oh yeah, look, see, he didn't break his oath. Okay, he did a really bad thing, but he didn't break his oath. Technically, he didn't break his oath. He did something way worse than that. He did zina. So that's the example. Okay, so we'll continue next time with su'alun, which is going to be some objections. Hey, you Hanafi people, you say that you're not going to, you say you're taking the haqiqa meaning or the majaz meaning, but we're going to point out some examples where we think you're taking the haqiqa and majaz meaning at the same time. And then we're going to see the Hanafi responses to that. Okay. I got to run. So if you have questions, please bring them to class next time. And like I said, Let me confirm and I'll put it in the WhatsApp, but I think we should have an exam, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.
Get started. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we're starting Surah Sad, page 668. With some preliminary information. It is a Makki surah and talks mainly about the qudra of Allah. It's a short surah, talks mainly about the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives comfort to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on account of the difficulties he faced with his people and commands him to have sabr. This surah also mentions aspects of the stories of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam, Ayyub alayhi salam, and mentions other prophets like Ibrahim, Ishaq, Yaqub, Ismail, Al-Yasa', who is perhaps the biblical prophet Elisha, right? And Dhil Kifl was perhaps the biblical prophet Ezekiel. Right? And also a little bit of the story of Adam and Iblis. Right? Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صاد. الله أعلم بمراده به، والقرآن ذي الذكر أي البيان أو الشرف، وجواب هذا القسم محذوف، أي ما الأمر كما قال كفار مكة من تعدد الآلهة، بل الذين كفروا من أهل مكة في عزة حمية وتكبر عن الإيمان وشقاق خلاف وعداوة للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. كم أي كثيرا أهلكنا من قبلهم من قرن، أي أمة من الأمم الماضية، فنادوا حين نزول العذاب بهم، ولا تحين مناص، أي ليس الحين حين فرار، والتاء زائدة، والجملة حال من فاعل نادوا أي استغاثوا، والحال ألا مهرب ولا منجا. Swad. Allah knows what's intended by that, by the Quran, full of reminders, meaning clarification or honor. And the answer of this oath is omitted, meaning it is not like the disbelievers of Mecca say that there are many gods. Yet the disbelievers of Mecca are entrenched in arrogance, tribalism, and arrogance from faith, and opposition to the Prophet, opposition and animosity to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How many, meaning many or a lot, peoples we destroyed before them of previous nations, and they cried out when the punishment came down upon them, when it was too late to escape, meaning now is not the time to escape. And the ta in lata is extra, and the sentence is a hal to the fa'il in nadaw, meaning they cried out for help, and the matter is that there is no escape or safe place.
Right. So the translation the translation without the ta is the same, because فَنَادَوْا وَلَا حِينَ مَنَاصٍ, and they cried out when there was no escape, or when there was no time to escape. وَلَا حِينَ مَنَاصٍ. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the ta is extra, but under زائدة it says لِتَأْكِيدِ النَّفِي. So saying ta is similar to, like the other words also that, show lament and things like that, regret and remorse, right?
Yeah.
But if you were to take out the ta, grammatically it would still be complete. وَلَا حِينَ مَنَاصٍ.
Okay. وما اعتبر بهم كفار مكة وعجبوا أن جاءهم منذر منهم رسول من أنفسهم ينذرهم يخوفهم بالنار بعد البعث وهو النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وقال الكافرون فيه وضع الظاهر موضع المضمر هذا ساحر كذاب أجعل الآلهة إلها واحدا حيث قال لهم قولوا لا إله إلا الله أي كيف يسع الخلق كلهم إله واحد إن هذا لشيء عجيب. وانطلق الملأ منهم من مجلس اجتماعهم عند أبي طالب وسماعهم فيه من النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قولوا لا إله إلا الله أن امشوا أي يقول بعضهم لبعض امشوا واصبروا على آلهتكم اثبتوا على عبادتها إن هذا المذكور من التوحيد لشيء يراد منا. So the disbelievers of Mecca did not pay heed. Now the pagans are astonished that a warner has come to them from amongst themselves, a messenger from amongst themselves, warning them and causing them fear of hellfire after resurrection, and that is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the disbelievers said, and this is placing the apparent in place of the mutmar.
So basically, instead of saying وَقَالُوا هَذَا سَاحِرٌ كَذَّابٌ, which would be using the dhamir,
Yeah.
and it will be using the same dhamir as عَجِبُوا, because that's what the ayah started with. وَعَجِبُوا أَنْ جَاءَهُمْ مُنذِرٌ مِّنْهُمْ وَقَالُوا هَذَا سَاحِرٌ كَذَّابٌ. It would still mean the same thing.
Yeah.
But وَضْعُ الظَّاهِر means Allah gives the apparent fa'il. Allah says وَقَالَ الْكَافِرُونَ as opposed to saying وَقَالُوا.
Okay. This is a magician, a total liar. Has he reduced all the gods to one God when he said to them, say there's no God but Allah? Meaning, how can one God encompass all creation? Indeed, this is something totally astonishing. The chiefs among them went forth saying, وانطلق الملأ منهم. Oh, so the chiefs among them went forth from the gathering that they had, like at the house of Abu Talib. And they heard from him وسماعهم فيه. So in the gathering they heard the Prophet ﷺ say La ilaha illallah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the fihi is referring to the majlis?
Yes.
Okay.
Because if you remember from the seerah, when Abu Talib was passing away, the Prophet was present and other leaders were also present, and the Prophet was still, telling, Abu Talib, say La ilaha illallah, right? And Abu, Jahl says like, oh, are you gonna really give in to your nephew and abandon your gods, right?
Mm.
So Yeah.
Okay. And imshu, 1/4 saying
Sorry.
carry on. Sorry.
Sorry, this one is not referring to his death. This is referring to another incident also by Abu Talib. So if you look at footnote 13, it says روي أنه لما أسلم عمر فرح به المسلمون فرحا شديدا وشق ذلك على قريش, because they were now panicking because Umar رضي الله عنه accepted Islam. So فاجتمع 25 نفسا من صناديدهم ومشوا إلى أبي طالب وقالوا أنت شيخنا وكبيرنا وقد علمت ما فعل هؤلاء السفهاء يعنون المسلمين فجئناك لتقضي بيننا وبين ابن أخيك. Right? So 25 of them came to Abu Talib and said that you are our elder and senior, and you know what these sufaha, what these, dumb people basically, but they were referring to the Muslims, what they have done. So we have come to you so you can decide between us and so that you can decide between us and your nephew. فاستحضر أبو طالب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقال يا ابن أخي هؤلاء قومك يسألونك السؤال, فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم ماذا يسألونني؟ قالوا ارفضنا وارفض ذكر آلهتنا. ندعك وإلهك. Okay. فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم أرأيتم إن أعطيتكم ما سألتم أتعطوني أنتم كلمة واحدة تملكون بها العرب وتدين لكم العجم. So just say one word and you will be in control of the Arabs and also of the Ajam. And they said نعم. So the Prophet said قولوا لا إله إلا الله فقاموا وقالوا اجعل الآلهة أجعل الآلهة إلها واحدة إن هذا لشيء عجاب. So Allah literally quotes them in this ayah. أجعل الآلهة إلها واحدة إن هذا لشيء عجاب, because that's what they told the Prophet, and the Prophet told them, all you have to do is say La ilaha illallah, right? And their response was, it doesn't make sense for you to say there's only one God. Okay.
Animshu, carry on, meaning they would say to each other, like, carry on and stand firm in worship, in devotion to your gods. Certainly, what was mentioned of Tawheed is a scheme for power that he wants from us. Like, is it basically saying he wants to take over them? Okay. ما سمعنا بهذا في الملة الآخرة أي ملة عيسى إن ما هذا إلا اختلاق كذب. أنزل بتحقيق الهمزتين وتسهيل الثانية وإدخال ألف بينهما على الوجهين وتركه على محمد الذكر القرآن من بيننا وليس بأكبرنا ولا أشرفنا أي لما ينزل عليه. قال تعالى بل هم في شك من ذكري وحيي أي القرآن حيث كذبوا الجائي به بل لما لم يذوقوا عذاب ولو ذاقوه لصدقوا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما جاء به ولا ينفعهم التصديق حينئذ. أم عندهم خزائن رحمة ربك العزيز الغالب الوهاب من النبوة وغيرها فيعطونها من شاء أم لهم ملك السماوات والأرض وما بينهما إن زعموا ذلك فليرتقوا في الأسباب الموصلة إلى السماء فيأتوا بالوحي فيخصوا به من شاء. وأم في الموضعين بمعنى همزة الإنكار جند ما أي هم جند حقير هنالك أي في تكذيبهم لك مهزوم صفة جند من الأحزاب صفة جند أيضا أي من جنس الأحزاب المتحزبين على الأنبياء قبلك وأولئك قد قهروا وأهلكوا فكذلك يهلك هؤلاء. Okay. We have never heard of this in the previous faith, meaning the religion of Isa. This is nothing but a fabrication, a lie. Has a reminder been revealed only to him, upon Muhammad, meaning the Quran, out of all of us, while he is not our eldest or our most noble? Meaning, why did it come down upon him? Allah said, they are only in doubt of my revealed reminder, my revelation, which is the Quran, because they rejected the one that came down with it. In fact, they have not yet tasted my punishment, and if they were to taste it, they would affirm the Prophet ﷺ regarding what he came with, and during that time, affirming it will not benefit them. So أأنزل can be read أأنزل أأنزل أأنزل. Okay. أم عندهم, or is it because they possess the treasuries of the mercy of your Lord, the Almighty, the giver of all bounties, of prophethood and other things, so they give it to whoever they will? Or is it because the kingdom of the heavens and the earth and everything in between belongs to them? If they claim that, let them climb their way to heaven. If their claim is true, let them climb their way to heaven. فليرتقوا في الأسباب. So let them climb their ropes that lead to the sky and come down with revelation, فيخصوا به, and like give it specifically to whoever they wish. And the in
So if they have basically, if they have a problem with the prophet being appointed a prophet, then they can just go to the skies themselves and bring down revelation and then choose who they want to give it to.
so the in both places is like the Hamza to reject.
It's in the meaning of the Hamza, which comes to reject.
Okay.
Like Alahum mulku samawati wal ardi wa ma baynahuma. Right? You know, A'indahum khaza'inu rahmati rabbika. Right?
Jundun ma, this is just another force, a weak force, bound for defeat out there, in their rejection to you. Mahzoom is sifa to Jund, and Ahzab is also sifa to Jund, meaning from the groups that were divided against the prophets that came before you.
Mutahazzibina means to be in partnership against, also connected to the word hizb, right? But mutahazzib means to be a partner with. So mutahazzibin, to be in partnership against the prophets that came before you.
And they were overpowered and destroyed, and just like that, these people will also be destroyed. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح، تأنيث قوم باعتبار المعنى، وعاد وفرعون ذو الأوتاد، كان يتد لكل من يغضب عليه 4 أوتاد، ويشد إليها يديه ورجليه ويعذبه، وثمود وقوم لوط وأصحاب الأيكة أي الغيضة وهم قوم شعيب عليه الصلاة والسلام أولئك الأحزاب إن ما كل من الأحزاب إلا كذب الرسل لأنهم إذا كذبوا واحدا منهم فكذبوا جميعهم لأن دعوتهم واحدة وهي دعوة التوحيد فحق وجب عقاب وما ينتظر هؤلاء أي كفار مكة إلا صيحة واحدة في نفخة القيامة هي نفخة القيامة تحل بهم العذاب ما لها من فواق بفتح الفاء وضمها رجوع وقالوا لما نزل فأما من أوتي كتابه بيمينه الآية ربنا عجل لنا قطنا أي كتاب أعمالنا قبل يوم الحساب قالوا ذلك استهزاء. كذبت قبلهم before them the people of Nuh denied the truth as did Ad Fir'aun of the mighty structures. So كذبت so it's so كذبت is تأنيث because not too sure.
So كذبت is تأنيث because of the word قوم or اعتبار المعنى. So the word قوم obviously is مذكر, so its فعل should have been مذكر, but كذبت is مؤنث, so the only explanation you can have is قوم باعتبار المعنى. In terms of the meaning of the word قوم, so one possibility is like قبيلة, right? Like peoples, basically, which is مؤنث. So باعتبار المعنى, it becomes مؤنث, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And Fir'aun of the mighty structures, he would build so for everyone that got angry at him.
So كان يتد لكل من يغضب عليه, whoever he was angry on.
Okay.
So he would peg every person he was angry with, أربعة أوتاد, with 4 pegs. And that would be like on, basically that yashuddu, that would be attached, or it would be pegged on their hands and feet, and he would then torture them.
وثمود, Thamud, the people of Lut and the residents of the forest, is غيضة just another word for Aika?
Yeah,
Forest.
forest. So
And they,
yeah.
They were the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam. These were all enemy forces. Each.
So Shu'aib alayhi salam was sent to 2 peoples, right? Ashab al-Aika and Madian, right? So Ashab al-Aika were the people that he was close to, but he was not from them. Because Allah says, وَإِلَى مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا, right? That to Madian, their brother Shu'aib. In other words, somebody from their people was sent to them as a prophet. Whereas Ashab al-Aika was, at least a close by people who could understand him and could communicate with him.
Each of the groups rejected their messenger, because if they rejected one from one messenger, it's like they rejected all of them, because their message is one, and that is the message of Tawheed. So my punishment was justified. these disbelievers of Mecca are awaiting nothing but a single blast, that is the blast of the Day of Judgment, in which the punishment will come down upon them. That cannot be stopped, so it can be read with the fatha on the fa or the dhamma. And they said when the ayah came down, so whoever is given their book in their right hand, they said, "Our Lord, hasten for us our share of the punishment," meaning our book of deeds before the day of reckoning, and they said that mockingly. قال تعالى: اصبر على ما يقولون واذكر عبدنا داود ذا الأيد، أي القوة في العبادة، كان يصوم يوما ويفطر يوما ويقوم نصف الليل وينام ثلثه ويقوم سدسه، إنه أواب رجاع إلى مرضاة الله. إنه أواب رجاع إلى مرضاة الله. إنا سخرنا الجبال معه يسبحن بتسبيحه بالعشي وقت صلاة العشاء والإشراق وقت صلاة الضحى، وهو أن تشرق الشمس ويتناهى ضوءها، وسخرنا الطير محشورة مجموعة إليه تسبح معه كل من الجبال والطير، له أواب رجاع إلى طاعته بالتسبيح. وشددنا ملكه قويناه بالحرس والجنود، كان يحرس محرابه كل ليلة 30,000 رجل، وآتيناه الحكمة النبوة والإصابة في الأمور وفصل الخطاب، البيان الشافي في كل قصد. Allah said, "Be patient with what they say, and remember our servant Dawood, the man of strength," meaning strength in worship. He would fast one day and not fast the next day, and he would pray half the night and sleep for a third and stay up for a sixth of the night. Surely he was constantly turning to Allah in what pleases him. We truly subjected the mountains to join him in making tasbih in the evening during Isha prayer, wal ishraq, and after sunrise during the time of Salatul Duha, and that is when the sun rises and its light fades away. And we subjected the birds flocking together towards him, making tasbih with him, as well as so kullu lahu awwab. So everything of mountains and birds were turning to Allah with him through tasbih, and we strengthened his kinship. We strengthened his kingdom. We gave him power with guards and soldiers, and he would guard his mihrab so 30,000 men would guard his mihrab every night, and gave him wisdom, prophethood, and being right in matters.
Correct judgment in matters, right? Correctness, basically.
وفصل الخطاب and sound judgment. البيان الشافي في كل قصد.
Shafi here means like satisfactory.
Okay.
Satisfactory explanation in every decision.
وهل معنى الاستفهام هنا التعجيب والتشويق إلى استماع ما بعده؟ أتاك يا محمد نبأ الخصم إذ تسوروا المحراب. محراب داود أي مسجده، حيث منعوا الدخول عليه من الباب لشغله بالعبادة، أي خبرهم وقصتهم إذ دخلوا على داود ففزع منهم قالوا لا تخف نحن خصمان قيل فريقان ليطابق ما قبله من ضمير الجمع، وقيل اثنان والضمير بمعناهما. والخصم يطلق على الواحد وأكثر، وهما ملكان جاء في صورة خصمين وقع لهما ما ذكر على سبيل الفرض لتنبيه داود عليه السلام على ما وقع منه. وكان له 99 امرأة وطلب امرأة شخص ليس له غيرها وتزوجها ودخل بها. بغى بعضنا على بعض فاحكم بيننا بالحق ولا تشطط تجر واهدنا ارشدنا إلى سواء الصراط وسط طريق الصواب. إن هذا أخي أي على ديني له 99 نعجة يعبر بها عن المرأة ولي نعجة واحدة، فقال أكفلنيها اجعلني كافلها وعزني غلبني في الخطاب أي الجدال، وأقره الآخر على ذلك. قال لقد ظلمك بسؤال نعجتك ليضمها إلى نعاجه، وإن كثيرا من الخلطاء الشركاء ليبغي بعضهم على بعض إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وقليل ما هم. ما لتأكيد القلة فكان الملكان صاعدين في صورتيهما إلى السماء. قضى الرجل على نفسه فتنبه داود. قال تعالى وظن أي أيقن داود أن ما فتناه أوقعناه في فتنة أي بلية بمحبة تلك المرأة، فاستغفر ربه وخر راكعا أي ساجدا وأناب فغفرنا له ذلك وإن له عندنا لزلفى أي زيادة خير في الدنيا وحسن مآب مرجع في الآخرة. وهل هل means a question here. To cause amazement and like excitement to hear what comes after.
So هل in the meaning of istifham here is for ta'jib, is to provoke curiosity, what tashwiq, and to provoke interest, to hear what comes after.
Okay. Has the story of the two plaintiffs?
Yeah, that's right. The people who came to complain.
Okay. Has the story of the two plaintiffs who scaled the wall of Dawood's sanctuary reached you, O Muhammad? So the place of prayer of Dawood, meaning his masjid, when they prevented him from entering from the door because he was busy in worship, meaning their news and their story. When they came into Dawood's presence, he was startled by them. They said, "Have no fear. We are merely two in a dispute." Khasman, they said two groups. يطابق ما قبله. So it can like correspond to what comes before it of the ضمير of Jam.
So, so the khasmani is to so basically you have this dhamir of khasmani which doesn't really correspond to the dhamir of dakhalu. As dakhalu ala Dawuda, and then they say qalu, that corresponds with each other, dakhalu and qalu, because it's the same, and it's talking about the two people who have come in, right? But then Allah says khasmani, so that's tathniya, so it corresponds to the dhamir of jama, or basically it corresponds in meaning to the dhamir of jama, even if it's not jama literally.
Okay. والخصم يطلق على الواحد وأكثر. So the word خصم can mean one or more.
Yeah. So وهل أتاك نبأ الخصم also corresponds to تصوروا, دخلوا, قالوا, right? Because it could apply to one or more.
And they were two angels that came in like the appearance of two groups. وقع لهما ما ذكروا على سبيل الفضل.
So basically, the two plaintiffs, the people who came to complain, were actually angels who came in the form of two plaintiffs, and they were mentioning وقع لهما ما ذكر, and they were mentioning what is mentioned in the Quran على سبيل الفرض, hypothetically. So their scenario, this exact scenario that is mentioned in the Quran, is a hypothetical scenario to alert Dawood about what was happening to him or what he did. So it was a way of them making him realize something, and it wasn't necessarily a situation for them because they're angels. They simply came, and the scenario that they put in front of him was to make him realize something else. So finish the ayah and then we'll go over some details.
وكان له, so he had 99 women, and he requested not too sure. وطلب امرأة شخص.
So he requested the wife of a person who was not for him or who was not his.
Okay.
Or ليس له غيرها, who did not have, so this person didn't have any other wife, except her. So if you look at the numbers under, so he requested the wife of a person who did not have anyone but her.
We are merely two in a dispute. One of us has wronged the other, so judge between us with truth. Do not go beyond it, and guide us to the right way. Was like to the moderate way. إن هذا أخي, this is my brother, meaning upon my religion. He has 99 sheep. So this يعبر بها. So it means the woman. While I only have one, still he asked me to give it up to him, meaning make me its owner, overwhelming me with his argument. And the other one affirmed that. Dawood eventually ruled, he has definitely wronged you in demanding to add your sheep to his, and certainly many partners wrong each other except those who believe and do good, but how few are they? And the ma is to emphasize a few. So the angels were صاعدين, ascending.
So the angels, yeah.
Were ascending in their appearance to the sky. And the man judged upon
Suratayhima, in their original appearance to the skies. And then they were saying that he has, so the man has judged against himself, and fatanabbaha Dawood, and as a result, Dawood became alerted. Okay, finish the paragraph and then.
Okay. So Allah said, then Dawood realized that we had tested him, that we had made him fall into a fitna, meaning a test, by like loving that woman. So he asked for his Lord's forgiveness, fell down in prostration, and turned to him in repentance. So we forgave him for that, and we indeed have a status, and he will indeed have a status of closeness to us, meaning an increase in good in this life, وحسن مآب, and an honorable destination in the hereafter.
Okay, so the question now is, how do we understand this incident? So let's look at what the ayah itself, or what the ayah without the tafsir. Okay, so ayah without the tafsir says something very specific, and of course Jalalain mentions kind of an explanation of that. So Allah says, and has the story of the two plaintiffs who, Khattab's translation, who scaled the wall of Dawood's sanctuary, reached you, O Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When they came into Dawood's presence, he was fazi'a minhum, he was startled by them. And they said, have no fear, we are merely two people or two in dispute. One of us has wronged the other, so judge between us with truth, do not go beyond it, and guide us to the right way. This is my brother. He has 99 sheep while I have only one. Still, he asked me to give it up to him, overwhelming me with his argument. So Dawood eventually ruled, he has definitely wronged you in demanding to add your sheep to his, and certainly many partners wrong each other, except those who believe and do good, but how few they are. How few are they? Then Dawood realized that we had tested him, so he asked for his Lord's forgiveness, fell down in prostration, and turned to him in repentance. Okay? So there's an ayah of sajda here. Make sure you do sajda. Okay? So that's what the ayah says. The ayah doesn't give any other detail beyond the obvious. Okay? Now the tafsir mentions a particular incident and an explanation. The tafsir said that these two claimants, these two plaintiffs, were actually angels who came in this form, and they presented this hypothetical scenario to Dawood in order to make him realize something he was doing wrong. What is that? That Dawood alayhi salam had 99 wives, and he wanted the wife of another person who only had one wife. He didn't have any other wife besides her. And then it mentions in footnote number 1 and 2, for example, that this was something perhaps permissible in the Sharia of Dawood alayhi salam, right? So just based on this, that's what the footnotes that's what the footnote is about. That they were able to basically, ask if they could have somebody else's wife or something like that, based on the footnote. And Dawood alayhi salam wanted that, and the hypothetical scenario presented by the angels, according to the tafsir, the hypothetical scenario of 99 sheep and one person only has one, and that person is now being asked for that one that he has, was a way for the angels to make Dawood realize that what he wanted was wrong, what he was doing was wrong. And as a result, when he realized that, oh, this is exactly what I'm doing, then فَاسْتَغْفَرَ رَبَّهُ. Dawood alayhi salam did istighfar. Now, the apparent translation, the apparent meaning of the ayat give no hint. The apparent meaning of the ayat gives no hint towards this incident. If you look at the bottom of the page on 670, okay, this you have to remember is Imam. So this is Imam Mahalli's part, right? This is Imam Mahalli's part of Tafsir Jalalain. So look at the bottom of page 670, that footnote. It says, "Inna ma dhakarahu al-Mahalli huna wa ghayrahu fi at-tafsiri wa qisas al-anbiya'i min anna Dawood alayhi salam ahabba imra'atan wa talaba min zawjiha an yanzila lahu anha ila ghayri dhalika mimma fihi ذكر للمرأة في هذه القصة هو باطل لا أساس له من الصحة ولا يجوز اعتباره مطلقا بل يجب اعتماد ما قرره العلماء المحققون في تفسير هذه الآيات." Simply put, the commentators, they say that this narration has no basis. Okay, this narration has no basis. Look under فَتَنَبَّهَ دَاوُود. This is the second to last line of where we stopped. فَتَنَبَّهَ دَاوُود. Under it, it says كَذَا رُوِيَ عَنْ ابْنِ عَبَّاسِ عَنْ كَعْبِ ibn al-Ahbar. Ka'b ibn al-Ahbar radiallahu anhu was a former Kitabi who would narrate from the Old Testament as well. Okay, so Dawood alayhi salam obviously is a Old Testament Jewish Hebrew prophet, right? So a lot of these narrations, and Sulaiman alayhi salam has a couple as well. A lot of these narrations about Yusuf, about Sulaiman, about Dawood, and so on. There are many narrations that are very unflattering and, simply put, very disrespectful, or it seems very unlikely of a prophet to do so, based on how we think of prophets. So something like this is not befitting the shan of the prophet. So the commentators have said that this narration is baseless, it's part of the Isra'iliyat, and it's not even necessary for you to take this far-fetched explanation in order for you to explain the ayah. So it gives like 4 scenarios. It continues from the bottom of 670 and then a little bit on top and then back to the bottom of 671. That entire paragraph is connected with this footnote. So basically it gives multiple scenarios in which you can get a full explanation of the ayah without resorting to a far-fetched explanation. And basically, if you were to take this ayah literally, then you would not have to resort to any, ta'wil. You would not have to resort to any interpretation, because the literal ayah itself makes sense, that you had two people who literally scaled the tasawwarul mihrab. They kind of came into his inner chambers, evaded all the guards. They came into his inner chambers, and because they came into his inner chambers, fazi'a minhum, because Dawood alayhi salam doesn't expect or didn't expect people to be there when he was engaged in ibadah, right? Because as a king, he would meet people in the court, and he had all of these guards so that he would remain undisturbed, right? And these people, these two individuals who really wanted a judgment, they kind of, climbed the walls and came to his inner chamber. And as a result, because of their sudden appearance, this happens when you don't expect someone to be, like all these, sometimes you might get scared by, you open the door and somebody's just standing there, but they just came, but you didn't expect nobody to be there. And so you get like startled, right? So fazi'a minhum, he kind of got startled because he didn't expect anyone to be there. And these two individuals came and they said that we have a complaint and we want your judgment. And it was literally that scenario, that I have 99 sheep and he has one, or I have 99 sheep and he has one and I want what he has as well. Is that fair? So even though the ayah doesn't mention, because somebody could make an ishkal, somebody could say that, well, it seems like Dawood alayhi salam just gave the judgment without hearing the other person out. Because part of good judgment is to hear both sides of the story, right? Part of good judgment is to hear both sides of the story. So why didn't Dawood alayhi salam listen to the other person? Because ayah number 23 says, this is my brother, he has 99 sheep and I only have one. And still he said, give it to me. And he has overwhelmed me in speech, like he's making an argument as to why he needs my one as well when I only have one. Ayah number 24, it just says, قَالَ لَقَدْ ظَلَمَكَ. Dawood alayhi salam says, well, if he said that, then he has oppressed you. So, well, what about that other person's explanation, the 99? Even though on the surface it looks like, okay, this person is clearly in the wrong, wouldn't part of sound judgment be to also hear that person out so you know their side of the story? Maybe that one sheep that went to the other person is part of his flock, right? And that person has just come to think of it as their own. So because of that, if you look at Khattab's translation of ayah 24, he says, David eventually ruled. Eventually ruled. Why was that word eventually there? Because of the implication that he didn't hear. Does that make sense? That he didn't hear the other person out. So even though it's not mentioned here, the assumption is Dawood alayhi salam did hear him out, and then Dawood alayhi salam made this judgment. And we say that based on how Allah describes Dawood alayhi salam previously. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحِكْمَةَ وَفَصْلَ الْخِطَابِ. And the sign of hikmah and fasl al-khitab is to hear both sides of the story. So even though it's not mentioned here, we could assume that he heard him out and then he was just simply affirming, قَالَ لَقَدْ ظَلَمَكَ بِسُؤَالٍ. That was his judgment. Do you get that point?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So did Dawood make an incorrect judgment?
No. So the apparent translation of the ayah is sufficient as an explanation for the ayah. There's no need to go to these far-fetched explanations of, oh, the two angels came to say 99 sheep to kind of hint at 99 wives and so on and so forth, and him wanting the other one is him being unfair to that other person. You don't need to go to that far-fetched explanation, which according to the commentators, majority of them say that it's Israeliyat, that has no basis. لا أساس له من الصحة. Because the very apparent explanation of the ayah is sufficient as tafsir, that this person has 99 and I have 1 and he still wants it from me. And Dawood alayhi salam says that he has wronged you by demanding that you add your sheep to what he has. And certainly people wrong each other except those who believe and do good, but how few are they? Okay, so his judgment was correct. Okay, if you say that the ayah itself is sufficient of a tafsir and it doesn't require you to come up with an explanation, how do you explain the words fatannahu? How do you explain the word fatannahu, which is Dawood realized that we had tested him. وَظَنَّ دَاوُودُ أَنَّمَا فَتَنَّاهُ, and Dawood realized that we had tested him. So now you have this one word that you have to account for, because in the book it says أَوْقَعْنَاهُ فِي فِتْنَةٍ أَيْ بَلِيَّةٍ بِمُحَبَّةِ تِلْكَ الْمَرْأَةِ. That the test, if you took the far-fetched explanation, would be that he had this love for this other woman, right? Which again doesn't seem befitting of a prophet. So how do you explain fatannahu? So within the explanation at the bottom of the page, it says that fatannahu in this case is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing these two individuals to get access to Dawood when he was not expecting anyone. So first of all, he was intruded upon. This is his private space, his private sanctuary. He's doing ibadah. He was disturbed. His privacy was violated. And he could have become angry, right? That his privacy was violated. He could have said, come back tomorrow, come back and meet me in the court. But this is on the third line of the footnote on page 671, right? So, look at the second line. Second line of the footnote at the bottom of page 671. أَمَّا الْفِتْنَةُ وَالْإِسْتِغْفَارُ, meaning it's referring to the words فَتَنَّاهُ and فَاسْتَغْفَرَ. That how do you explain those two words if you say that the apparent meaning of the ayah is sufficient? فَنَقُولُ فِيهِمَا إِنَّ دُخُولَ الْخَصْمَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ وَهُوَ فِي مِحْرَابِهِ فِي غَيْرِ مَجْلِسِ الْقَضَاءِ هُوَ اِخْتِبَارٌ لَهُ وَامْتِحَانٌ. That the appearance, the entrance of these two plaintiffs when he was in his inner chamber and not in his majlis of qada, not in his court, was a way of testing him. لِبَيَانِ مَا إِذَا كَانَ سَيَقْضِي بَيْنَهُمَا أَمْ أَنَّهُ سَيَقْضِبُ عَلَيْهِمَا وَيَطْرُدُهُمَا. Would he get angry on them or not? لِإِفْزَاعِهِمَا, because they frightened him. وَمُخَالَفَتِهِمَا آدَابَ الدُّخُولِ, and they were in contradiction to the etiquette of entering upon a king. You don't like go to the inner chambers, bypass everyone and everything and just directly confront the king. You have to go through the protocols, right? Which they didn't obviously do. وَلَكِنَّهُ رَغَمَ فَزَعَهُ مِنْهُمَا لَمْ بهما. I'm not figuring this word out. Okay. ولم يعاقبهما بل كظم غيظه. So what did he do? He was intruded upon, his privacy was violated because they didn't follow any of the protocols and they startled him. He could have become angry, but, and this was a test, ظَنَّ دَاوُودُ. Dawood alayhi salam at the end realized that this was a test from Allah. So he had passed the test. Why? Because he كَذَمَ غَيْظَهُ. He had swallowed his anger. وَاسْتَمَعَ إِلَى شِكْوَاهُمَا, right? He listened to their complaints, right? وَلَكِنَّهُ اسْتَعْجَلَ فِي الْحُكْمِ عَلَى أَحَدِهِمَا قَبْلَ سِمَاعِ قَوْلِهِ. Right? ثم بعد انصرافهما أدرك عليه السلام أن ذلك كان فتنة وابتلاء وأنه استعجل في الحكم فاستغفر ربه من ذلك. Right? So One possibility is that he listened to their complaint, but he was quick in judgment. He didn't hear the other person out. So that's another possibility, that he didn't hear the other person out. He heard one side of the story and he quickly gave the judgment. And then when he realized later on that this was a test from Allah and that he had kind of been istajala fil hukm, he had kind of been hasty in ruling, because of that he did istighfar. Make sense? And the istighfar of a prophet, فَإِنَّ إِسْتِغْفَارَ النَّبِيِّ لَا يَلْزِمُ أَن يَكُونَ عَنْ ذَنْبٍ أَوْ مَعْصِيَةٍ. The istighfar of a prophet doesn't mean that they were making istighfar from a sin, because Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam كان يستغفر الله ويتوب إليه في اليوم 100 مرة كما جاء في صحيح مسلم. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would also do istighfar, but he was ma'soom. Why? بل هو رفع لدرجات الأنبياء. So it is for the increasing of rank for the prophets. Okay. So والغريب أن تضفي هذه الحقائق على بعض العلماء الذين أكثروا من نقل القصص الباطلة في حق الأنبياء. So it's like these strange stories, you know, a lot of them just get propagated by some of these ulama, like with regards to Yusuf and Musa and Dawood, Sulaiman, Isa and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَفَسَّرُوا الْقُرْآنَ بِمَا لَا يَقْبِلُهُ عَقْلَ سَلِيمٍ, and they use it to do tafsir of the Quran, which the sound judgment cannot accept. فَضْلًا عَنْ عَدَمِ ثُبُوتِهِ فِي كِتَابٍ وَسُنَّةٍ, without being substantiated, without being established by the Quran or Sunnah. Does that make sense? So basically, the commentator is saying that a lot of these stories get propagated, which the sound mind cannot accept. Because if you think of prophets as the best of creation, and if you think of the prophets as ma'asum, and if you think of them as beyond sin, they're still capable of human mistakes, but not to this degree. This is like beyond what we would consider of a prophet. So we have to look at the source of it, and you find that, okay, this is from Israeliyat, number one, and there is no need even for you to look for an explanation, because the apparent translation of the ayah is sufficient for you to understand the ayah. That these two people that came to Dawood alayhi salam, and this is part of the explanation that's mentioned in this footnote of the bottom of the 2 pages, that these two people that came to Dawood alayhi salam were actually two people and not two angels in disguise. And they had, in actuality, 99 sheep for one of them and 1 sheep for the other. It wasn't a metaphor for anything else. And Dawood alayhi salam gave his judgment, and then he realized that fatannahu, that Allah was testing him. Allah was testing him how? By allowing these two real people tasawwarul mihrab, by allowing these two people to actually access his inner chamber where they violated his privacy, violated the protocols of meeting a king and all of these things. But kadama ghaydahu, right? Dawood alayhi salam, he swallowed his anger, he listened to them, and then he gave his judgment. And fastaghfara rabbahu. So this istighfar doesn't have to be also even because he realized he was hasty in his judgment. He didn't listen to that other party, and he kind of just said what he thought of at the moment. And because of that, he did istighfar. It's not necessary, because istaghfara rabbahu can just be taken as that I seek the protection of Allah. I seek the forgiveness of Allah, right? Which is similar to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam making tawbah and doing istighfar 100 times a day. Right, so you don't even have to consider anything else for a very simple explanation of fastaghfar. That Dawood alayhi salam later realized this was Allah testing me, and I seek the protection of Allah from not passing any test. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So again, kind of necessary to really go over it in detail. Because when you do read these things in the books of Tafasir, you do have to hunt down those sources, right? So this is mentioned in Jalalain, but if you look in older books, some of them will mention it, some of them won't. And if you kind of dig through where those books get it from, eventually you realize that it's not from any substantiated source from the Quran or Sunnah, right? And that is basically Israeliyat. And you have to be even more careful when it comes to what we would call biblical prophets, because the Old Testament and New Testament, and even before, a lot of these details were kind of just not necessarily accepted, but sometimes they were just mentioned by Mufassirin, right? And then it was the job of the scholars to accept it or not. Does that make sense? Okay, continue. I think we can finish the next ayah. That's going to finish the next paragraph.
Oh, so
يا داود إنا جعلناك.
okay. يا داود إنا جعلناك خليفة في الأرض تدبر أمر الناس فاحكم بين الناس بالحق ولا تتبع الهوى أي هوى النفس فيضلك عن سبيل الله أي عن الدلائل الدالة على توحيده إن الذين يضلون عن سبيل الله أي عن الإيمان بالله لهم عذاب شديد بما نسوا بنسيانهم يوم الحساب المترتب عليه تركهم الإيمان ولو أيقنوا بيوم الحساب لآمنوا في الدنيا. Um, so, okay. O Dawood, we have surely made you an authority in the land, taking care of the affairs of the people. So judge between people with truth and do not follow your desires, or they will lead you astray from Allah's way, meaning from the proofs that indicate to His oneness. Surely those who go astray from Allah's way, from faith in Allah, will suffer a severe punishment for neglecting, by them forgetting the day of reckoning, that comes as a result of them abandoning faith. And if they had certainty of the day of reckoning, they would have believed in this world. Should I continue, Sheikh?
Yeah, let's finish the page. Next one is Sulaiman alayhi salam's story. No, actually. Yeah, let's stop here.
Okay.
The Sulaiman alayhi salam stories also have the same issues, or at least the explanations that are kind of given here. So that will require some explanation. Inshallah. What time is it? 11. Okay. Let's take like 5 minutes and then we'll do some Hidayat al-Nahu, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Sheikh, I have to go to class right now, so. Okay, so.
All right, let's get started. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, وكفى وسلام على عبادي الذين اصطفى. صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. So we're in the chapter of Marfu'at. We finished Fa'il and Na'iul Fa'il. And now we are starting the third and the fourth of the Marfu'at, which are Mubtada and Khabar. So they're mentioned together because obviously they are part of the same sentence structure, right? So تفصيل المبتدأ والخبر, page 83. فصل المبتدأ والخبر وهما اسمان مجردان عن العوامل اللفظية. The mubtada and khabar, they are two isms which are free from any lafzi awamil. They are free from any lafzi awamil. In other words, there are no, amil in a sentence like Zaydun qa'imun that makes Zaydun be marfu' and qa'imun be marfu'. The fact that they are the mubtada and the khabar in the sentence means that they have to be in the state of marfu. So they don't have a visible amil, but they have basically an implied invisible amil that makes the mubtada marfu and the khabar marfu. Okay. أحدهما, one of the two isms of a jumla ismiya is musnad ilay wa yusamma al-mubtada. It is the musnad ilay, right? And it is named the mubtada wa thani musnad bihi wa yusamma al-khabar. So the khabar is connected to the mubtada, right? And the khabar relates information about the mubtada, right? So they are basically musnad and musnad ilay. These terminologies came up in the introduction. So the mubtada is known also as musnad ilay, and the khabar is known also as musnad bihi. Al-mithalu lil-mubtada wal-khabar. Example of a mubtada and khabar, نحو زيد قائم. Al-amilu fil mubtada wal-khabar. What is the amil of a mubtada and khabar? Wal-amilu fihima ma'nawiyyun. The amil in both the mubtada and khabar is ma'nawi. Wa huwa al-ibtida. And what is the ma'nawi amil? It is ibtida. Ibtida basically means it comes in the beginning of a sentence, or it starts the sentence. So Zaydun qa'imun, the first ism, by virtue of coming in the beginning of the sentence, and by virtue of being an ism, and by virtue of being the musnad ilay, by being the mubtada, it becomes marfu. Qa'imun, by virtue of it being the musnad bihi, which is explaining the word Zaydun, is now in the state of marfu as well. So that's obviously very simple explanation of mubtada and khabar rules. Now another aspect of the mubtada is al-mubtada'u ma'rifatun aw nakiratun. Does the mubtada have to be ma'rifa or nakira? Does the mubtada have to be ma'rifa or nakira? Wa aslu al-mubtada'i an yakuna ma'rifatan. The asl of the mubtada that it has to be ma'rifa. وَأَصْلُ الْخَبَرِ أَنْ يَكُونَ نَكِرًا, and the asl of the khabar is that it has to be nakira. So the default is Zaydun qa'imun, basically. Zayd is ma'rifa, qa'imun is nakira. Now, is it possible for either one of them to be something else? مَتَى يَكُونُ الْمُبْتَدَأُ نَكِرَةً. When can the mubtada be nakira? Okay. وَالنَّكِرَةُ إِذَا وُصِفَتْ جَازَ أَن تَقَعَ مُبْتَدَأً. It could be nakira when it is made وُصِفَ. When it is made a sifa, or when it has a sifa, then it is permitted for it to be nakira. So it could be a nakira. So the mubtada can be a nakira when the mubtada is occurring as a mawsuf sifa, right? When the mubtada is occurring as a mawsuf sifa, so mubtada basically has a sifa, so it's mawsuf sifa becoming the mubtada, and the mawsuf sifa is nakira. In that case, you could have the mubtada be nakira. نحو قوله تعالى, example, وَلَا عَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ. Abdun mu'minun is mawsuf sifa, right? Abdun mu'minun is mawsuf sifa, and Abdun mu'minun combined to become mubtada. So here the mubtada is nakira, but it's only possible for it to be nakira because it's Abdun mu'minun, it's mawsuf sifa. If it was just the word Abdun, you cannot make it a mubtada because it has to be mawsuf sifa. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Another way that the mubtada can be nakira instead of having to be ma'rifa is وَكَذَا إِذَا تُخُصِّصَتْ بِوَجْهٍ آخَرٍ, when it is specified in another way. So when it is specified in another way, meaning when it stands out from something else in the sentence, then it could be nakira, no problem. Nahu, for example, arajulun fi dari am imra'atun. Okay, you're not saying just arajulun fi dari. Is there a man in the house? That could mean anything. So that's not possible. But if you say arajulun fi dari am imra'atun, is there a man or a woman in the house? Now this is tukhussisat biwajhin akhar. You are restricting rajulun in a very specific way. So the word rajul, which is mubtada in this sentence, can be the mubtada even though it's nakira, because it is being specified in another way. رجل في الدار أم امرأة, or ما أحد خير منك, there is no one better than you. The word أحد is nakira and is functioning as a mubtada, but it's possible to only have that as a mubtada because you're saying خير منك, you're restricting it. Same thing. شر أهر ذا ناب, شر أهر ذا ناب, which literally means a major problem made the dog bark. So sharrun, a problem, aharra, made the dog, dhanabin. The dha is basically like du malin, right? So dhanabin is used for dogs. So dhanabin aharra. So something has made the dog bark. Okay. So sharrun is nakira, but it's mubtada because it's a specific, it's a problem that has made a dog bark. So tukhussisat biwajhin akhar. Same thing, fi dari rajulun. The word rajulun is mubtada muakhar, right? But it's nakira, but it's fine because you're saying fi dari. So that restricts it. You're not just saying rajulun, any rajulun. You're saying fi dari rajulun. And same thing, salamun alayka. Salamun alayka. Salamun is nakira, but you're not just saying salamun, you're saying salamun alayka. So you're restricting it to a person. Okay. So let's look through the table on page 84 and 85. It's basically talking about the same ways that mubtada can be nakira. So number one, bil wasfi lafdhan, when a wasf has been brought for the mubtada in words. So abdun mu'minun, for example, makes the word abdun specific because it has the sifa of mu'minun after it. So both together can function as the mubtada. Number two, bil wasfi taqdiran, when there's a wasf for the mubtada, but it's there in meaning. In other words, it has been restricted in a particular way. Okay, so these explanations in the table is basically breaking down the specific types of examples that we just did on top. Okay, so sharrun aharra dhanabin is where the wasf has been brought for the mubtada in meaning but not in words. So unlike abdun mu'minun, where mu'minun is a sifa for abdun and therefore specifying abdun, sharrun aharra dhanabin doesn't have that word, doesn't have that sifa that would specify the word sharrun, but it's there in meaning. If you look at the explanation, the word sharrun is mubtada despite it being nakira because it has the word sifatun, because it has the word azimun as a sifa following it in meaning. Because the original form of this phrase is sharrun azimun aharra dhanabin. A major problem has made the dog bark. But the word azimun is not mentioned because, you know, it becomes a shorter version of it. So when you say sharrun aharra dha nabin, there is a sifa implied within the sentence, so that specifies the nakira word sharrun. Number 3, taqa'u ba'da istifham. If your nakira mubtada occurs after istifham, it is permissible. So for example, rajulun fi dari am imra'atun. So rajulun is occurring after the hamza of istifham. So in this example, the word rajul is mubtada despite it being nakira because it occurs after the istifham. Now, as the clause after istifham and restricts the options to 2, in this example, either rajul or imra'a, therefore it has been made specific. Because the entire sentence, the structure of the sentence specifies the meaning of the sentence. Because when you have istifham and because if you're saying, is there a man in the house or a woman? So you're using the word is there and or basically means one of the two. You're saying it's either this or that. And that's more specific than a generic nakira word. Does that make sense? So rajulun fi dari am imra'atun in this case would be absolutely fine. Okay. Number 4, taqa'u ba'da nafyin. Your nakira mubtada occurs after a nafi, occurs after a negative particle. Ma ahadun khayrun minka. In this example, the word ahad is mubtada despite it being nakira because it occurs after a nafi. The reason being that after the negative particle, a nakira creates generality. The generality will result in all the individuals becoming one overall, therefore making it specific. So ma ahadun, there is no one, basically means everyone else. So it's a little strange because ahad means any person or one person. But when you say ma ahadun, there's no one. In that phrase, there's no one, you're including everyone other than what you are excluding. So if you say there's no one better than you, you are taking everyone else on one side. So that in and of itself makes it specific. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Number 5, كون خبرها ظرفا أو جارا مجرورا. So في الدار رجل is jar majrur متعلق, which is basically متعلق بالخبر, and رجل is مبتدا مؤخر, right? So if the news, so basically if your khabar of the sentence is a dharf, or if it starts with the harf jar, right? Then your mubtada can be nakira because the way the khabar comes by being a dharf or by having a harf jar, the khabar restricts the mubtada, even though the mubtada is a nakira word. In this example, the word rajul is mubtada despite it being nakira, as its khabar starts with a harf jar. The reason being that the khabar comes first and the mubtada comes second. This is contrary to the normal rule. What is the benefit of having what we call an abnormal sentence structure? What's the purpose of having the khabar first and the mubtada second? Exclusivity, right? Wa ila Allahi al-masir. Because the default of that would have been al-masiru ila Allah. But when you say wa ila Allahi al-masir, you are restricting it to specifically Allah. And you are restricting al-masir specifically to Allah. Does that make sense? So that happens when you say fi dari rajul. That in the house, there is a man. We're not talking about any other man. We're talking about the man that's in the house. Okay? So this could occur by either doing dharf, which restricts a place or time, and harf jar, which could restrict it to a time and place as well, right? So you're not talking about any other person, you're talking about the person in this place. And the last one is مفيدة للدعاء. Salamun alayka, as an example, is where the mubtada is a dua. Okay? In this example, the word salam is mubtada despite it being nakira because it occurs as a dua. The reason for this is the original text was Salamtu salaman alayka. Salamtu salaman alayka. So after you remove the verb, it becomes salaman alayka in halatul nasab. And then it's changed to the rafa state because halatul rafa indicates upon continuity. So salamun alayka, may peace always be upon you, literally. Does this make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so all of this has been the like real scenario that, okay, fine, the general rule of thumb is that the mubtada is ma'rifa and the khabar is nakira. But what, can the mubtada ever be nakira? Yes, it can be nakira in these very specific scenarios. Okay. تعيين المبتدا والخبر, specifying the mubtada and khabar. وإن كان أحد الاسمين معرفة, if one of the two is ma'rifa والآخر nakira and the other one is nakira, فاجعل المعرفة مبتدأ, you will make the ma'rifa ism the mubtada والنكرة خبرا, and you will make the nakira the khabar. البتة, always, كما مر, as it's past, because that's the general rule. So if you have two words, Zaydun qa'imun, for example, and for example, they're qa'imun Zaydun, or you have two words and you want to put them together to make a jumla ismiya, which one do you appoint as the mubtada, which one do you appoint as the khabar? Well, you appoint the ma'rifa one as the mubtada and you appoint the nakira one as the khabar. This is when the mubtada is not a nakira word, because when the mubtada is a nakira word, it has to follow certain conditions in order for it to be nakira. Okay. Now, what happens if both of the isms are ma'rifa? Because if one is ma'rifa and one is nakira, then you know which one is what. But what if both of them are ma'rifa? وَإِن كَانَا مَعْرِفَتَيْنِ, if both of them are ma'rifa, فَاجْعَلْ أَيَّهُمَا شِئْتَ مُبْتَدَأً وَالْآخَرَ خَبَرًا. Whichever one you want, you can make the mubtada and the other one will become the khabar. For example, Allahu ilahuna. Allah is our Lord. So you could say ilahuna Allahu or Allahu ilahuna, you will still get the same meaning because both of them are ma'rifa. Adamu alayhi salam abuna, or you could say abuna Adam alayhi salam. Both of them are nakira, both of them are ma'rifa, so you could make either of them mubtada and the other one khabar. The same way, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam nabiyyuna. You could say nabiyyuna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam or Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam nabiyyuna, because they're both ma'rifa. It doesn't matter which one is mubtada, which one is khabar. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So from here on, there's going to be more of a focus on the khabar, because the khabar has more possibilities, right? Because the mubtada comes in the beginning and the mubtada is either ma'rif or nakira, and the mubtada is a singular word, but the khabar can come in multiple forms. The khabar can be ma'rifa, the khabar can be nakira, the khabar can come as a single word, the khabar can come as an entire sentence or a sentence construct on its own before it becomes the khabar. So the mubtada is discussed first because it comes first, but it also has a less rules, right? And then you have the khabar. So inshallah we'll continue with that on Monday. Right? Any questions?
No, sure. Jazakallah khairan.
Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah,
Wa alaikum salam.